This episode of Tempo Talks was sponsored in part by Fur Planet Productions, publishers of hundreds of Anthro titles, including My Six's Wild and Windfall series. Check them out at furplanet.com. Welcome to another episode of Tempo Talks on Culturally Effed. I'm your host, Tempo, and today we're going to be talking with Graham Hamilton, whom you might know as the star of Rock Dog 2. Graham,
Hey.
would you mind introducing yourself and saying maybe how you got into voice acting?
Yeah, sure. So voice acting for me was probably for a lot of people listening, I don't know, is a dream of mine forever. So when I was a teenager, I'm 32 now, so this was when I was 15, a long time ago, I became interested in, this wasn't Friendship is Magic, but I did become a fan of the My Little Pony, those DVD specials.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm kind of,
You're like a proto-brony.
I am a proto-brony, yes. That term has been
Okay.
used before.
Okay.
And so I was always really into cartoons and stuff, like a lot of people. And for whatever reason, what was it called? A Very Minty Christmas.
Okay.
That special, if you've heard of it, that for some reason, I can't explain why, that one, I just noticed the voice of Minty and was like, wow, this is, I just found the performance really compelling in a way that I never had before. I don't know why.
Mhm.
And so I looked
Yeah,
up.
it just resonated.
Yeah, and so I looked it up, and I was like, who is this person? And I found, it's this person, Tabitha St. Germain. Huh, interesting. Oh, they're in Vancouver, which is where I live. And I was just a 15-year-old, kid. And literally, it's so preposterous. But, I was, a very unsuccessful child actor. And so I was going for, a little kind of acting coaching session at my agency that I was with. And literally, I went to go see my acting coach, who is a woman named Kendall Cross, who's a little bit famous in her own right. And I told her this. I was like, I've been watching this My Little Pony thing, and there's this actor, Tabitha St. Germain, who I'm really kind of I've looked up a lot of her stuff. She's really good. I like her. And Kendall was like, oh, well, I know her. And as we were leaving, literally, as I was walking out of my agency, Kendall was like, oh, there she is. That's Tabitha right there. Because she was in the same agency as me, which I didn't know.
That's amazing.
It's unbelievable.
So, for those of you playing at home, this is the voice actor for Rarity and Princess Luna we're talking about on Friendship is Magic. And My Little Pony has this thing where they have, if you'll pardon the pun, a stable of voice actors they pull from previous specials.
Yes.
And so, Tabitha St. Germain has also been in a zillion other things. But,
yeah.
Okay, so now we can resume the story.
Well, so I went up to her, and I was a 15-year-old, I was a big fan of Fall Out Boy. I was, so I wouldn't say I was a pop punk. And I, for this era, this would have been 2004. And so, being a fan of My Little Pony at that time, kind of still to a certain extent.
Oh, no.
But
Totally was. I can relate because I was a fan of the original cartoon because a friend of mine grew up on it and she was like, no, you have to check it out. She actually got me interested because we both like sci-fi, and she's like, oh yeah, nanotechnology apocalypse. It's just like the Smooze. And I'm like, what are you talking about, Megan? Oh, well, this. And then, so I watched the entire, I too was a proto-brony because I watched the entire old series and then a bunch of the specials, and then was like, then the new series came out, and I'm like, oh, they look so wrong to me. With their big weird eyes. They're, they're like babies.
Rainbow Dash
and
is Pegasus now. What the?
Yeah, what is happening? Help. And so, I get it. I am.
Yeah.
So, but you went up and talked to her.
So I went up and talked to her, and we had a very brief interaction because this is the most starstruck I've ever been in my life. we had this. Basically, I was like, hey, I'm a fan of yours, and she was probably assuming I'd be a fan of like. I don't know if this was out at the time, but Black Lagoon or something, like something more, more theoretically appropriate for this weird punk-looking kid.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, I'm a big fan of Minty and also Thistle Whistle, who she was also
That's
the voice
awesome.
of. Thistle Whistle was also a great character, and her mind was blown. And I remember she said, "You made my millennium."
That's amazing.
But
yeah, because she probably thought you were gonna talk to her about like Gundam.
Yeah, exactly.
Or like DBZ or something, or Inuyasha. Because
absolutely,
like, it really goes to show that like, like we say like these shows are for guys and these shows are for girls, but really like if you're making quality media, it doesn't really get limited that way. Like you can just have people be interested in your stuff. And so like I'm glad to see that distinction kind of falling away. Like people younger than us, when they talk about it, they're like completely shameless, a lot of them, about like having something that's marketed to the to a different gender. They'll just be no, I totally like this. And so
and I'm glad, right? Like for me at the time, like I said, like in terms of my personality back then, I was very edgy. I was very confrontational, kind of I don't want to overstate it, like, you know what I mean? But I was...
Yeah, you're a teenager.
I think if I didn't have that personality at that time, I probably wouldn't have been able to openly parade, like wear a My Little Pony shirt and stuff. Because it was a little bit... It reinforced my personality as like, oh, that Graham guy is a weirdo.
Right. Like, yeah, that's right. I'll break all the rules. I'll wear a Minty t-shirt.
Exactly. Oh, what I wouldn't have... I just had a generic unicorn. I would have loved to have an actual Minty shirt. Well, now... So I collect... Well, that's a bit of a strong word, but I a friend of mine who works at another studio in town is also a voice actor. She is, her name's Danny Meager, I think is her name. I know her name. I don't know how to pronounce her last name. I know her name, to be clear. And she helped me because she has a gargantuan Scooby-Doo collection. She's a real expert collector of stuff. And so she helped me now at my advanced age. I have a collection of just about every kind of Minty toy.
That's great.
Like, I have as a weird, like...
Are those old enough that they have like the magnet in the hoof and stuff?
I don't have those ones.
So maybe Minty is newer than that. I don't know.
Well,
Minty,
have
to go on the wiki.
So my understanding is that there's a Gen 1 Minty, who I have this kind of reissue of that I got. Actually, that was one of my oldest. That was a birthday present when I was 18. So I have that one, but Gen 1, if we're being honest, that's not the one I care about. I care about Gen 3.
Right.
And then there's a bunch, they're hard to find, but there's a bunch of Gen 4 Minties. And I guess now, is it officially Gen 5 now?
I don't think really... Pony Life counts as its own gen. I think it's being counted as like an in-between while they develop the next one. I could be wrong.
Okay. Well, so if there is a Gen 5 or whatever, eventually I guess I will have to get that Minty. But the majority of my collection at this point is the Gen 4, and I have, including the crown jewel of my collection, which is the Build-A-Bear, which I wonder how much of this interview is going to be just about my Minty.
That's fine. This is what the people are here for, honestly. Well, so like you're in the right place.
The truth is that Tabitha, like meeting that experience of being interested in cartoons generally, My Little Pony, and it's not like My Little Pony was my favorite show, but Minty, I was like, wow, that's interesting. That was my introduction to that voice acting was a career, and I'm so lucky that I'm in Vancouver. I mean, for goodness sakes, that I'm in Vancouver, that I was at that agency, that I got to meet Tabitha, and it was this explosion of like, not only is this something that is a career, this is something you can do, and it's like you're in one of the best cities to be doing it. And here she is. Like, I maintain to this day that Tabitha St. Germain is the best voice actor in the world. A lot of people think Billy West, which is fair. Billy West is amazing, and they actually worked together once on a Popeye cartoon. But that's just me. This is my outpouring of geekiness. But I maintain Tabitha's number one. Billy West number 2, and then probably Troy Baker would be who I'd put as third.
Well, and Tabitha's been on so many weird things that you don't even think about because she has a really broad range. Like, I know her from watching Jim Henson's Dog City as a kid, and she's like Kitty. She's like the mobster girlfriend of the main bad guy. And I'm like, oh my, and like it made sense like when I looked up the IMDb, like when Friendship is Magic came out, that I was like, oh my gosh, that's, you know, this is someone who I actually sort of know, and they just don't sound like that. And it's really cool that it worked out like that for you, because like it's really neat to see like the ascended fan in action. Like you go from being a fan to producing the media people are fans of. Well, that's really cool. And so like from that point, like did you kind of like shift gears and do a little bit more of the voice acting side as a kid, or did it take a little while for you to kind of switch over? Or...
What I wouldn't give to be able to tell you that then as a teenager that I had the courage to, because it's my agency, right? We're in the same, like all that stuff that I then pursued it, but for whatever reason, well, I know why. Voice acting represented this, I don't know, this very terrifying concept. Even though I was doing, like I was occasionally getting little bits in TV shows here and there or whatever, like seeing myself on camera, but the idea of doing a voice and having an animated character, like having a character, for whatever reason, I just kind of sat on that knowledge for a long time. Like so I completely diverted. I became just kind of, I went to film school, trying to be a director, all this stuff. I eventually landed, I had like a YouTube channel for a while, because I'm also very passionate about video games. Like as many, I think there's a very high overlap between people that are obsessed with cartoons and video games.
Oh, yeah.
And that's another passion of mine. And so I eventually kind of went on this whole other career. I hosted a very small show here in Vancouver that I lovingly call the least popular show in the world. And it was called Game Frame, and it was just this, there's like no record of it online anymore. Basically, imagine a local news show, like that level of production value, but about video games. We're talking about gaming news, interviewing game developers, occasionally going to GDC or going to PAX or different conventions and interviewing.
It's like Wayne's World.
Yeah. Yes. Basically, yes. And so I did that for a long time, and when I was about 25, and honestly, that was like that's great. That is, I'm very proud of that show, but it was almost, it was like, this is a good enough life. Do you know what I mean? Not to get into like a weird motivation.
You're like, well, you're just kind of like, I am doing this, and isn't this the realistic version of my dream?
Yes, like this isn't. If I could do anything, if I could pick any career, I'd want to be a voice actor. But, you know, this is great. I get to talk about video games. I get, I'm on TV every week locally. This, like, gosh, isn't that great? I get to interview people like Ed Boon or Ron Gilbert. Like these, I got to interview Tom Fulp. Like, I get to do these things. But eventually, not only was the show canceled, but the channel ceased to exist. The channel, the entire channel shut down, and everyone was fired. And at that moment, I sort of had this crossroads where I was like, do I want to keep doing this? Like, do I want to, I have this fabulous video game journalist resume. I could go and try to get a job, like I'm in Canada, so CBC maybe, or one of our other networks, or I could apply to GameSpot or something like Polygon. Like, maybe could I do that? I have a lot of on-camera experience. I have a lot of experience covering the industry. I could maybe get into PR, all this stuff. But I decided, I was like, you know what? I've always dreamed of being a voice actor. I've always known about that. I know that it's here. I know voice actors. I'm going to try to do it. And that was, I don't know how many years ago. Not that long. And I just started taking voice acting classes and sort of decided, well, I'm going to try to be a voice actor, or I'm going to just like be homeless. like rather than pursue some other thing that is not really my dream. Does that make sense?
Yeah, right. You were like, I'm gonna actually commit to doing this.
Yeah, and also once I got a taste of it, once I actually had like in classes and I got a couple small things, I got to play these kind of weird characters. Once I had experienced that, it wasn't even fun. It was just the best experience of my life. That of just playing this. I played this like shark guy in a game called Ember Strike that nobody's heard of, but it's cool. And it was a very small. It's not much, but I got to do this. I got to speak into a microphone. I got to do a weird voice, which destroys my throat. Otherwise, I do it for you now. And I was just like, man, screw video games. Like, no, I love video games. But you know what I mean? I was like, I want to just dedicate my energy to doing this, as much of this as I can. And then that's what I've been doing ever since.
Cool. And so, like, and then you've been involved in other video games since.
Mm-hmm.
As a voice actor, right?
Yeah, so when I finally did, I spent about a year doing classes, because we have some classes in Vancouver. We have a bunch of classes available. There's a school that's fairly popular called On the Mic, which has a bunch of stuff. They're kind of expensive, but I did a bunch of those classes. I trained with, so we might get to this later. Over the course of my experience of taking these different classes, almost every other cast member of Rock Dog 2 at some point was a teacher of mine. I took a class with them at some point. So
that's great.
Kathy Wesluck was the first. She does classes here in Vancouver, and that was the first animation voiceover class I ever took. Brian Dobson, Brian Drummond, almost all of them. And Jason Simpson.
So, like, this was like a reunion for you, essentially. Yes.
Yeah. Well, so, and maybe we'll get to that later, or we can get to it now. But that helped to alleviate, when I actually did get into the room to be Bodhi, it was incredibly nerve-wracking, and because it was like an unbelievable dream come true after this whole journey that I've told you about, right?
Yeah.
Like, don't get me wrong, I did book the part because they liked my auditions, right? But
yeah,
part of what helped with the nerves was the fact that for anyone that's a fan of any of these actors, they are the nicest people in the world. It's unbelievable. Like, that story of meeting Tabitha and her being fantastic, that applies to everyone that I've worked with in Vancouver, with occasional exceptions, but not in this cast.
Well, right, like the pony, even just if we look at like the pony crossover for this movie, which is at least 3 people, because that's like Ashley Ball, who's Rainbow Dash,
yep.
Kathy
and
Weasley,
Applejack.
who is Spike, and Applejack, Kathy Weasley, who's Spike, and Andrew Francis, who's Shining Armor.
Yeah, Twilight. Hey, Twilight.
Those guys, Twilight. I know. I think he plays various surfer ponies as well. I think that beach movie one
that doesn't sound like him.
Yeah, I know.
I went to a yoga class. It was like a yoga class with Andrew, and he was like facilitating it. And for anyone who's a fan of My Little Pony, it's great. I love. By the way, for the record, out of a cast of people that were amazing to work with, Andrew was the nicest. Andrew was actually like several orders of magnitude nicer than anyone could ever reasonably expect. Because also part of my nervousness, like, he's played plenty of leads, and so he really, really helped me to fit into that spot, right? Of being in every, not literally, but pretty much every scene, and like almost every scene, Bodhi's around, and a lot of the time, Bodhi is the person that everyone is talking to. And there's no break. Do you know the term prelay?
No, go ahead and explain.
So prelay, basically, in animation, there's dub and there's prelay. So a dubbed show would be like anime, like if you're coming in, if it's already been recorded and we're coming in afterwards. So the majority of the work that I've done, other than a couple things, is dubbing or ADR, where
Right.
we're matching the mouth flaps or whatever. Prelay is when they're recording and you get what I mean. Like they're recording us, and they're going to go animate to the audio that we give them, or that we've performed for them. So that's just prelay. So in a prelay situation in Vancouver, I think in LA this isn't always the case, but in Vancouver, pretty much, with very few exceptions, everyone is in the room together.
Oh, good. Cool.
Yeah, and actually, my understanding is that Vancouver uses that... The studios in Vancouver use that as a bit of a promotional... When we're trying to... like, if the studios here like Ocean or Coco or whatever are trying to compete for jobs with LA or with other markets, one of the benefits to Vancouver is, hey, the cast will all be here together. Everyone's in the same room. They're acting off each other. Whereas I think in some other places, it's one person at a time or whatever, and they're very busy. That's fine.
Right. And so, like, that's one common thread that I've heard from a bunch of different voice actors is when you can bounce off each other, it's way more engaging, and you have a way easier time getting into the character and the scene.
Absolutely. But it comes with the added issue of, like, if you're an on-camera actor and you're playing opposite Robert De Niro or Daniel Day-Lewis or something like that, it can be very intimidating because maybe this is like a hero of yours. Or even just the fact that in the case of someone like Robert De Niro or countless other actors, in the middle of the scene, you might find yourself lapsing into like, wow, he's doing a really good... Like, this is like Heath Ledger in The Dark Knight. You could imagine watching Joker and being completely stunned with just, this is so good. Like, wow, I'm completely sinking into this performance. I'm totally riveted.
Right, because they're very compelling.
But your character is supposed to say something.
Yeah, they have a lot of presence, and they're very compelling. And then you totally are ready. You're totally not ready to say your line then suddenly, because you were too awestruck.
Yes,
like you're too into it. Yeah,
and that's the thing is like one of the downsides. I don't want to overstate that because obviously, it's this is an incredible journey. But one of the downsides to being a huge fan of voice actors and animation and stuff like if you're like one of us that knows all these voice actors, I know these things or whatever. If you're there performing in a scene with them, you have to have a lot of self-control to not just be listening to their performance.
Right.
Because you're a fan.
Right, because, and especially, like, people who are established, like, Andrew Francis has been voice acting, like, almost as long as you and I have, like, been alive.
Yeah.
So he's been on, like, Lamb Chop's Play Along, and so, like, your brain developed listening to some of these voices that you're now supposed to be interacting with.
100%.
And it kind of freaks you out. Like, I totally fanboyed all over when I was talking to Elizabeth Hanna, because Dog City's Rosie O'Gravy was, like, kind of a similar thing for me, because I had a moment of, like, oh my god, that person's the same voice actor as this other character.
Right.
Because she's also in the Care Bear movie, she's like the Queen of Hearts. And I'm like, it clicked for me when I heard those two voices. I'm like, oh, that's the same thing. And, like, it was weird because, like, I suddenly, like, as a little kid was suddenly like, oh, okay, stories can, like, you can have the same story told in different ways, and you can have the same person in different cartoons, and cartoons don't just, like, descend from the heavens.
Yeah.
Like, fully formed.
And also, like, now that I'm suitably immersed in the industry and have booked parts and have had the opportunity to sort of pitch, hey, here's my version of this character, here's my take on what this person could sound like, and then you book it or you don't. But when you book it, me personally, I'm struck with the sense of, like, this show, like, whatever we're doing, this show or this movie, this doesn't really apply to Rock Dog 2 because obviously we had the first one to go off of, but in a completely, like the very first My Little Pony or the very first whatever.
Yeah.
This show could have been so many different things if depending on which actor They decided for the role which version of the character. Oh, will this person be more gravelly? Will they, all these things. You could have it totally, like a famous example in Star Wars, but the guy that played Magnum PI was almost Han Solo. And
Right.
when you look back at those casting, at the auditions, here's the thing. If you detach yourself from the fact that we know Harrison Ford and we know we've had these characters for...
Tom Selleck,
thank you so much. It's not like Tom Selleck can't act. It's not like if Tom Selleck hadn't gotten that part, it's entirely possible that we would have grown up with Tom Selleck as Han Solo rather than Harrison Ford. That isn't to say that, I absolutely adore Harrison Ford, but do you get what I mean? Like, that's...
Right, like, it would have been a radically different portrayal.
Yeah, but that would have been what we had. Some alternate universe that is. Or whatever. Marlon Brando's playing Han Solo. Or whatever, right?
Right.
And so when you're actually on this side and seeing the creation of these properties, for me personally, I'm very aware of that.
Yeah.
That anyone... I don't know if I'm making sense.
Well, right. Like, it's easy to think of, oh, well, this is just, this is cartoons, it's kids media, it's not as serious as other stuff. But, like, really, that will matter to someone,
mm-hmm.
and making it good will make it matter to more people and more deeply. And so, like, you want to get it right, and you want to, like, make sure that you're doing justice to this part, even if it seems a little bit silly.
Yes.
Even if you were playing an objectively kind of goofy character, because it's a kids show and there are lots of goofy characters, but like
mm-hmm.
you still want it to be meaningful, and like you want to give it your all, which is why like Minty was appealing to you, because Tabitha St. Germain came in and like gave a good performance, even though you could have just kind of done, the basics and it would have been fine. But like, you can tell when people are into stuff. Like, you can tell when people involved in a creative project really are enjoying themselves and going for it. And like, they're in the moment. You can totally, like, that comes through.
Or if they're phoning it in.
And so like, right. Yeah. And even a kid can kind of pick up on that. A kid can pick up on your excitement.
Absolutely.
Even, and so like, clearly it is worthwhile to do that, because media for kids is also important.
Well, so this is kind of a serious topic, but when I trailed off before about how I don't really know why I was so intimidated about being a voice actor, it's a bit of a lie. I know exactly why.
Okay.
Because I don't want to get into it because it's very heavy, and I don't want to overstate it, and we're having a good time. But I had some rough patches in my childhood. Just some, I'm sure you can imagine. And I know for myself that that's directly related to the kind of geeky stuff that I'm into. That as a kid, when stuff was bad, whatever, when I was in pain, whatever's happening, I could tell you, but I don't want to.
Well, right, but like this was a safe harbor.
Exactly, and those cartoons, like, and not just cartoons, like also Power Rangers and stuff. Like, there's plenty of, if I'd been a kid at the time, I could totally see something like Blue's Clues, like those, the entire spectrum of those shows is where I would escape to, and video games as well. And so getting older and older, and then this realization about voice actors, I think I tend to go in the direction of, honestly, maybe taking it too seriously, but I'm very aware, like when we're doing, like, so in Rock Dog 2, a lot of those sequences, the sort of journey that Bodhi goes on, I'm very aware of the effect that this might have on kids. And like when I was a little kid, like, I'm trying to think about, I don't want to get in trouble with Lionsgate, but like when I was a kid, a little kid, watching Aladdin, watching Return of Jafar, or The King of Thieves, those three movies. As a little kid, I couldn't tell the difference between, do you know what I mean? Like, for me, this was the Aladdin trilogy. Now that I'm older, I can't view them that way, but a little kid, like, I am very aware, and I can see occasionally, I'll see something on Twitter, some parents talking about, hey, we're sitting down to watch Rock Dog 2 with the family, because these kids are or whatever.
Yeah.
And for me personally, I'm pretty much thinking about like what effect, like having a positive impact on kids. That's my priority the entire recording time, pretty much.
Yeah.
And so what's bad about that is just that if you build that up too much, you can freak yourself out and obsess over your responsibility.
You put a lot of pressure on yourself then.
Oh, I'm rambling. All that is to say, talking about the importance of kids' entertainment, as far as I'm concerned, like now that I'm here, that I am a working voice actor, I'm nowhere near the same level of...
You're not as established yet, but...
And I'm very aware that I'm not. But I'm here, I'm booking things from time to time. I got to play Bodhi once Luke was done with it.
No, objectively you have made it. Like you start in a movie and like, you know, it has international distribution. Yeah. Like I congratulate you. You have made it.
Thank you, Tempo.
Like and so like, but yeah, you're saying.
Well, just the thing, like when I'm going for auditions, when I have something or if I book something, in terms of like comparing quote unquote children's entertainment to other stuff, dude, who cares about that stuff? Like, right. This is, like, these shows and the impact they have, like, when you think about, oh my gosh, like, talking about Friendship is Magic, watching that. My Little Pony was always amazing, and as you know, like, we're both fans of it before, but Friendship is Magic went to places, and whenever I watched that show, or Avatar, or anything, any of these cartoons that we watch, I'm always thinking about, like, what kind of kid, like, you know, oh my god, like when a pony shows up like in a wheelchair, do you know what I mean? Or when a pony show like I remember that sequence where when the Cutie Mark Crusaders get they get their cutie marks, and like Applejack, I remember Applejack says to Apple Bloom, she says like Mom and Dad would be so proud, and it's like I think that was the first real reference to like their mom and dad not being around, right? They're not going deep into it, but imagine some kid somewhere like seeing that and having like, I'm gonna cry, sorry, like,
right, no, it's real. Like it means that you have seen a character who is like you, and it's been acknowledged as a real human experience.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously that's why representation is so important, but even when like even in a circumstance where they're all horses and stuff, it's like but you can still have, you can speak, you can portray the relationship between people, you can portray the circumstance that they're in, if a character's afraid, if a character's upset or whatever, and that's all, that is real, even if it's, you know, even if it's something goofy like Dragon Ball Z or whatever, where we haven't all gone into a training room, you know, that where a year is condensed to a day.
Oh yeah, or a montage.
No, but most of us can empathize with and have experienced a time where we're like for example, when I booked Rock Dog 2, I did watch Rock Dog 1. I watched it for the audition when I did my initial audition, but once I booked the part, I watched that movie so many times because, and it was like my training montage, because I was watching it, I was like, okay, I need to, because I wasn't really doing an impression,
but you were studying for finals.
exactly, and also because the sequel is a continuation of that storyline very directly. It's that, like, I probably shouldn't worry about spoilers, but you know what I mean? Like,
no, I mean, okay, like, for real, if the people who are watching this either have seen Rock Dog 2 or will go and see Rock Dog 2, like, it's okay. You can spoil things.
Okay, that's fine. So, like, you know, in the movie, like, the characters that are in True Blue, Bodhi, obviously, and the thing that's so great about the movie, like, the relationship with Compa, evolves so much. Like obviously tons of people will watch Rock Dog 1 and not watch 2, and it's whatever, but if you are watching 2, there's real stuff going on. The fact that Bodhi, like in the first movie, Compa doesn't want Bodhi to go. He wants him to, you know, Stay in Snow Mountain, all that stuff, and then the second one, he's flipped the other way, right?
Oh no, he's 100%.
Yeah, and
he is awkward parent enthusiast.
And then it becomes like Bodhi has this, this whole experience of, is this really what I wanted? And he's embarrassed by his dad, all that stuff. And then I still remember that sequence. By the way, for the record, when we're talking about my level of geekdom and all that stuff, Compa is played by Brian Drummond, who, when we're talking about being intimidated and stuff, like being in the room, for me as a Canadian, now, are you a fan of Dragon Ball Z?
Yeah, I've watched Dragon Ball Z and Dragon Ball Z Abridged to refresh myself.
So, you may or may not know that Dragon Ball Z, of course, fabulous, legendary Japanese manga and anime, and when it was getting dubbed into English, it was originally dubbed at Ocean Productions in Vancouver.
Oh.
And the original voice cast were all people in Vancouver. And in fact, unless I'm mistaken, it was done in the room that we did Rock Dog 2. It might have been the other studio. I don't remember. I don't know, because I wasn't there when I was watching Dragon Ball Z at the time. Anyway,
right.
Compa, Brian Drummond, was the original English voice of Vegeta. And he is, in fact, and now listen, got no problem with Chris Sabat. Got no problem with Funimation. They took it over. That's great. A lot of people, probably a lot of your listeners in the States, grew up with the Funimation dub. That's fabulous. And I just recently watched Dragon Ball Kai. It's fantastic. They're all amazing actors, but Brian Drummond is the one that said, it's over 9,000.
Right.
He's the one that said that. And respectfully, Chris Sabat, who is a genius, don't get me wrong, I'm not throwing shade here, but you can find the videos on YouTube of the different versions of that line. And I defy anyone to claim seriously that Brian Drummond's take on the "it's over 9,000" line is not the definitive "it's over 9,000."
Right, like he's so ridiculously into it.
Yeah, it's like that. That was one of the very first internet memes for a reason.
Yeah,
like the "it's over 9," around the time, I think it might predate All Your Base. I've
right. Yeah, it's early internet because and go ahead.
Just go and look on the Something Awful forums and see whether someone was banned. Was the person that was banned for saying All Your Base, was that before or after someone was banned for saying it's over 9,000? That's how we'll know.
And that's really, like, to go back to the the representation angle, this movie in particular resonated with, like, a number of people who previously hadn't seen, like Jingpa, who does a bunch of music for this channel and who is
that music's fantastic, by the way.
We would probably both agree the world's biggest Rock Dog fan.
As far as I can tell, absolutely.
As far as either of us been able to determine. And so, like, but he is from Tibet, and, like, I was talking to him a while back about the movie and, like, how it's really, really meaningful. Like, that was a big deal for him to see a character who is from Tibet and is not portrayed as, like, just like a background character. Like, a lot of the times, like, if a movie's got a scene in Tibet, like, yeah, they're Tibetan people, but they're, like, all monks, or, like, they're all just, like, mountaineers carrying stuff, and they're not, like, the main, and they don't have, like, an arc. And so, like, having that as the main character, it sounds like you say that and it sounds like, oh, that, is that really that big of a deal? But, like, if you think about it, like, having somebody who is from your background and having somebody, be able to say, like, this person's experiences are a lot like your experiences, and, like, this confluence of, like, my traditional culture and then the modern day, like, things changing in the modern day, and how do those, like, interconnect. That's a thing that is really meaningful when you see someone who is experiencing the same thing as you, which is, like, a really big deal in art. Like, art shows us that we're not alone.
Yeah.
It's so, like, I found Rock Dog really fun for that reason too, because it like introduced me to a bunch of stuff I hadn't really thought about. Like his guitar thingamabob in the movie isn't it, like that's a dramian. Yeah. That's like a thing. Like like that's like an established traditional instrument. And like, you know, the idea that like in this movie, like we get to actually see his grandparents,
and the food,
who also totally love music, and music is apparently not banned on all the other mountains, I guess.
Yeah, that was just his dad. That was just compa.
right. Yeah, it's so like, but yeah, because they're just like, oh yeah, music's great, and like it's interesting to see like, you know, a movie as an avenue to a part of the world you've never been to, and you don't have a lot of contact with. It's really cool to have that door opened that way.
Yeah. No, so I'm really glad to hear that I'm sorry, Jinpa.
And so he's of the various furries in like Tibet and China and places who have like contacted us about Rock Dog on the channel. Yeah. We sent one guy to the studio.
Wow, really?
To ask questions, because we had it. That'll come back. So like, but yeah, Jinpa is the one who does music for our.
Well,
for
you showed me some of that music, and it's phenomenal. So Jinpa, if you're listening, you're cool. And also, I sent you an email because I want to get in touch with you. I just wanted to say that I am very pleased to hear that Jinpa and that others are reacting to the original Rock Dog and hopefully the sequel the same way, because that's that's been on my mind, like especially when it comes to voice acting. Like I think I sound pretty stereotypical, but in case you can't tell, like I'm a white dude, and I'm cis and I'm straight and all that stuff, and so I don't want to overstate it. Like on the one hand, it's like, well, I'm playing this character who, strictly speaking, Snow Mountain is not Tibet, but it's clearly a Tibetan character. He's playing a Tibetan instrument and all this stuff. And so I've been thinking, like, how do I feel about that? And I feel good because I think that the conversation about those portrayals, I think it really changes if the character, like if it's a white dude playing a different character. I think the nature of that character is really important. Is it a stereotype? Is it insulting that culture? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the...
Are they the butt of the joke?
Yeah, a lot of the cases that have sort of blown up of white actors playing these other races in different parts, when you look at those characters, not always, but much of the time, it's a pretty offensive character. And it really just comes across... It's hard not to view that as, oh, here's a bunch of white people, being really incredibly...
Right, having a laugh at everybody else's
mocking
expense.
them, right?
Yeah.
And so when it comes to Rock Dog, for me, watching the original Rock Dog, I view it through the lens of Zootopia. And because I think the movies are similar in terms of the universes that they take place in. I think a lot of the characters if you transplanted Dharma or Bodhi, if they were somehow placed next to Judy or Nick, there'd be a bit, I guess Nick and Dharma, like they have very different proportions, but generally speaking, they're these animal characters, right? They could exist largely in the same space.
They have the same kind of rules for their settings.
And Zootopia, of course, as we all remember, the sacred text, Judy is from like a little farm. She's like kind of small town bunny, and that story is very much she's out there on the carrot farm, and she's like a country bumpkin character who moves to the big city. But with Judy, that's a very, like the portrayal of the whole thing, the way you see the farm, even to some extent the city, it's very American. Of course, it's unstated, but it kind of takes place in a kind of pseudo-American world. Rock Dog, to me...
Yeah, like the signage, the traffic lights, the paint on the roads. Like it looks like North America.
Now, Rock Dog... once he goes to the city and you see Rock and Roll Park and stuff, that it really looks like New York to me. So obviously there's a lot of influence there in terms of the actual city. I've forgotten the name of this city. But Snow Mountain is clearly Tibetan. It's clearly,
Oh my God,
like,
yeah.
very obviously. And so when I
And as you know, Tibet is really close to anything. Like, it's really nearby. You could totally take a bus from Tibet to somewhere in a day.
Bus. But generally speaking, like, aside from the fact that the city, that Rock and Roll Park kind of looks like Central Park, etc., that aside,
Yeah.
I really saw the original Rock Dog as like a kind of Chinese or Asian version of Zootopia. And the story of sort of a small town person going to the big city, I think it's a very similar story in that regard.
Yeah.
And that someone, and for Zhang Jun, which I think is the right way to pronounce the creator of Rock Dog, the original comic, like, that's his story of going from Tibet into, I guess, Beijing. I don't know.
Yeah, he's not Tibetan, but he, like,
I thought he was.
Is really connected. Right? No, I could be remembering wrong too, but I think he came to Tibet as a young person, as I think how it went, and he, like, really, like, is into the culture and into it and, like, into connecting with the people there and stuff. But he then, you know, goes into this wider world of, like, music and stuff after as a, like, an adult. So he is also, you are Bodhi, he is Bodhi, we're all
Bodhi. Well, like, so regardless, I guess, dealing with Bodhi, like, it struck me as a Chinese, you know, I don't want to dismiss it, but you know what I mean, like, equivalent.
Well, right, like, it's not narratively constructed like a Western movie in some ways, which kind of threw people off, and it's, like, a lot of the cultural coding is very Chinese and Tibetan, and, like, you know, you look at it and you see New York. Well, okay, you're from Vancouver, so you see Vancouver, which plays New York on TV. And
That's true.
Then when you talk to people who are from, like, when you talk to furries who are from China, they're like, oh, it's Chongqing. Because it's like, they're like, oh, it's Chongqing because it has the tall buildings and it's this. And then, like, if you talk to somebody from Hong Kong, they're like, oh, it's clearly Hong Kong because there are British expats.
Right.
And,
of course.
Like Angus.
Oh, of course.
And so it's clearly Hong Kong.
That never.
And then, like,
you just blew my mind.
Yeah. Right. And
I can't
like,
believe I was so ignorant to that. Of course.
And it is also New York. Like, it is clearly also parts of it are New York.
In the same way that Zootopia is. It's the kind of utopian the universal mega city.
Yeah.
The point I was trying to make was just that, for me as someone in Canada, and like Canada and the U.S., obviously there's differences, but I think for someone in another country, Canada and the U.S. are very similar. They're kind of, you know, especially, like, Vancouver actors that spend our lives trying to sound American. How do I put this? Like, as a Westerner looking at Rock Dog.
Right, like, person from North America.
I see Rock Dog and I'm like, wow, this is really cool. Like, for me watching it, like, I'm not very familiar with Tibetan culture, and so it's a bit of an entryway for me. So all that is to say that I'm very grateful if then people that are Chinese, are Tibetan, that are actually in those cultures, if they're seeing, like, as a Westerner, I'm like, oh, I think it's cool. I think it's good. I hope that they wouldn't find it offensive. It is a Chinese company producing the film. And so the like, you telling me that they really love it and identify with it and are appreciating it, that's a real relief. like that's because that would be my absolute nightmare. My hope is that, you know, we're talking about those kids, like the My Little Pony wheelchair and stuff. My hope is that, like, that some kid somewhere who is over in that part of the world or whatever would see this and identify with it and appreciate the representation. My hope, I would hate it if it was like, well, let's just be honest, if it was like Apu, where an Indian kid would be kind of horrified, and like that would be a real nightmare.
And it's all about, like, context too, like, because, like, when you talk to, like, when there are, like, interviews with the creators of The Simpsons, like the voice actors, they're like, okay, you have to understand that, like, at the time we had a wave of Indian immigrants and a lot of them in our area got jobs running, like, convenience stores, and that's what we're making fun of. We're not making fun of the idea of being Indian, but everybody's so over the top. But like that doesn't translate super well. Like we cis white dudes don't have the best track record for being totally sensitive about stuff. And so like I understand your hesitation about like getting it wrong.
Yeah. And to be honest, like when we talk about the performance, right? You might notice that Bodhi in particular, it's very similar to my natural voice, right? It's pretty much my natural voice, maybe a little bit, pushed up like slightly, but basically my natural voice.
Right, because you're trying to sound
like Luke Wilson. And that's like my objective was to make sure that I was into watching the movie. Like again, it's not an impression per se, because I think not for any of us. Because I think if they just hired like a Luke Wilson impersonator, a J.K. Simmons impersonator, then the characters would be really constrained, and they're doing new things.
Well, right, yeah. Well, like for example, if you've ever seen the Kung Fu Panda TV show, they found a guy who does the Jack Black is excited voice really, really well, but I feel like sometimes he gets kind of locked into that and can't go outside of it once in a while. And I'm like, okay, so like now they've had to kind of rewrite how they do this a little bit, or he's having to kind of like stay in that zone he knows sounds like most like Jack Black, as opposed to just exploring the range he normally would.
Right.
And so, yeah, like I get it. Like that totally happens. The way I kind of look at it, I mean, it's like you're watching an anime and like this is the English dub and this is the Japanese dub or something, or this is the new reboot of it or whatever. Like that, it just happens. Like it's like if you have a script for a stage play and different people are performing it, you shouldn't try to be exactly that. Or like if it's to use, since this is a music movie, if you shouldn't try to make your cover of the song sound exactly like the original, because then what was the point?
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot to talk about there, because even the music in the movie, I've thought about this a lot, like the two movies. So here's the thing. In case you can't tell, I'm not the singing voice. And to be honest, I think it's Matthew Gerard, but I don't know. It's not in the credits. It just says the song's produced by him.
Well, yeah, okay. So, like, I was also trying to figure out some stuff, because the IMDb page, like, we don't know, like, we're sorry to anyone we forget, because your name isn't, like, immediately on the IMDb page accessible to us. So, yeah, sorry. We'll put you in the description.
I'd love to know,
because
we
find out later.
Honestly, the thing that's funny, I don't know. I assume the movie maybe will get dubbed into other languages. I don't know. But as far as I know, in terms of English,
I know it's getting a Chinese release.
Of course.
Because I have talked to a couple people who are like, I am so ready. I'm going to go in September when it comes out. I don't care that I've already seen it.
That's
like,
great.
Well,
I mean, look, in no uncertain terms, the movie is produced for China. It's produced for a Chinese audience, much, with all due respect. I mean, I'm in North America, okay? But with due respect to us,
right.
I get the sense that the movie is a way bigger deal in China, and it was produced like the two red pandas, or like Wei and Shumei. I can't wait for the Chinese release, because that's kind of probably going to be the biggest release it'll have.
Yeah. Well, and like it's all about like being, like it's kind of keyed for that culture. Like even just stuff like in both movies, Bodhi really cares what his dad thinks, whereas in like the Western version of that movie, he would be like, I don't care what you say, Dad. I'm going to go play rock and roll, because we've seen that. That is what you do when your dad doesn't approve of rock and roll. And so like, but he cares. Like in the first movie, he is willing to give up the dream because his dad's like, whoa, that's, you need to stick to your responsibilities, etc. And then in the second one, he like kind of goes too hard because his dad's like, no, this is the best. We're going to do this. And like, you get the vibe, I did anyway. I got the vibe that like, Bodhi probably wouldn't have as easily gotten suckered into the like ridiculous, intentionally bad, Elvis costume and stuff, if it weren't for his dad being like, no, this is important.
Yeah.
Like, because he cares what his dad thinks. And like, that is something that really resonates for like audiences in other parts of the world that are a little bit less individualistic, a little bit less like, you're not supposed to care what your parents think. That's really important, because you're like, wow, okay, that's something that's familiar to me that, I can relate to, because you do care what your parents think, even if you're in a movie, like, et cetera, et cetera. And so, like, that's there to connect with that audience. And so sometimes when I talk to people from, like, the English-speaking world about Rock Dog, they're like, yeah, I didn't really, it was kind of a weird motivation, and why was he like this? And I'm like, why does he care what his dad thinks? And I'm like, well, right, but it's not for us. And, like, that's kind of the mantra of our age as cis white dudes, is be like, chill out, sometimes it's not actually intended for us primarily. We have to be like, oh wait, this might actually be, like, intended for someone else as the main audience. Oh, and, like, that can be really cool. Like, that's why I like, JRPGs and, like, anime and manga and stuff, because, like, it's not for me, and so I can see new stuff I didn't before. Like, probably for you too, like
100%.
Right, part of the appeal, like, and so that's kind of the big deal from what I've seen on that angle. Like, that's why people like it, and, like, it ties back to what we were talking about before with, like, making things that are represent the audience and, like, connect with kids, because kids media is just as important.
Yes. Well, yeah, and that's, so all that is to say, right? Like, when it comes to, like, my own focus when it comes to playing a Tibetan character, in as much as Bodhi is, that was pretty much 100% of my concern. But, like, if I saw an audition for a character that was very, that was, like, rude or stereotypical or whatever, I wouldn't have even considered auditioning for that.
Right, yeah. Well, and, like, for the people, for whatever person somehow got this far in the interview and hasn't seen either of the Rock Dog movies, like, Bodhi is a, like, very admirable and sweet guy. Like, no one should be upset, really, that they would be compared to Bodhi, because he is clearly the hero of and, like, it meant to be, like, a character we're supposed to relate to and admire. Yeah. Like, it's a kid's movie. It's not hard to tell.
Yeah, I couldn't say it any better than that. You're dead on.
And so, like, it's good, though. Like, I commend you for, like, having that in mind, because, like, not thinking about it is sort of how we made a lot of these things. Like, I kind of get the vibe that, like, a lot of the things we made in poor taste, people just kind of didn't worry about it, and they just kind of did whatever they thought would be funny. And, like, like, I get it, and that's how you come up with things that are then, like, offensive without meaning to, like a poo, where you're like, well, we just did it because we thought it would be funny, and there were only white people in the room, and so no one brought it up that it might be taken the wrong way.
It's also embarrassing when it's a large corporation, right? Like, and to be clear, I'm not trying to throw Apu under the bus. Like, I know...
Yeah.
I know that Hank Azaria, like, he's talked about it a lot. I'm fully aware of his intentions, that he wasn't trying to torment Indian people. But he's also admitted that it's like, well, it got away from him.
Right. I think he tweeted a while back that he's like, I would totally hand over voicing Apu to someone of Indian descent, but, that's something that people besides me have to be involved in.
Of course.
Because I'm told that it's not just voice actors who make cartoons.
Really?
I've heard there are some
why didn't anyone tell me
people
that?
Involved.
Though,
yeah.
Well, it's true, and that's the case in a lot of situations. There have been a few high-profile incidents where actors really get thrown under the bus. I totally shouldn't talk about this, but suffice to say, there are times where the decisions of a larger corporation can all be placed on the shoulders of the actor, and the cast of The Simpsons are very well paid, but they're still going to be the very last in line to make any kind of creative decision. They're not
right.
That's all I should say about that.
So, like, well, and it's valid. Like, it's valid to say, like, we must remember that many people come together to make a movie or a TV show or anything, or video game. And so if you like something and it's also got some problems with it, it's okay to like other things by those same people, because odds are that not all of them were responsible for the joke in bad taste
Oh,
or
yeah.
whatever was in it that, so like, I think that's something that we are still struggling with as a society, like to find that balance of like, okay, I can blame the voice actors because they're the most visible, but like they probably didn't do it. And like, so I get you. So we sent someone to the animation headquarters, and I think it's in Szechuan. I'm trying to remember. This was when the first movie came out, because we had questions. We had so many, like, this movie kind of came out of nowhere, and on the Chinese version of the website for the movie, it lists Jim Henson Studios. And we were like, what did they do? We want to know, like, what on earth is happening? Because that means that you, Graham, are the third Jim Henson voice actor who's been on this program, because and none of them have ever touched a Muppet.
That'd be great.
Because we find out that one of the fans of the fans of the channel lives in the same city.
Cool.
And we're like, hey, can you take the bus and go?
That's a big ask.
Right. Can you go and find out? Can you go to this building and figure out, is there like a Jim Henson sign?
Weapons and equipment,
is there something?
OSP.
Can you figure out what's right? And so, well, because we found the address and stuff. So he goes there, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I just walked in. The door wasn't locked." And I talked to the animators, and I'm like, "That's the best." Okay, and he's like, "Yeah." So they are like a satellite branch of Jim Henson, and they contributed like visual assets and stuff for Rock Dog, which have been used again in Rock Dog 2, which is why the characters in Rock Dog kind of look like they have the same fuzz as the new Muppet Babies.
I was just gonna say, is it like the fur texture?
Yeah, and as far as our detective work has been able to uncover, that was the Jim Henson involvement in this. And so and that's why some of the stuff looks the same, and some of it, between those properties, because the first movie came out in like 2017, so it was before the new Muppet Babies, so we didn't know what we were looking for. And now it's okay, I get it, like some of the cloth textures or whatever, like things they clearly had, and so like
that's fascinating.
Our source on the ground, we sent someone, because there was just no other way, like we couldn't find the information. For most of cinematic history, we've been like, what's in the credits? I guess that's all I have to work with. So our mandatory furry question is, of course, like, if you were an animal, what would you be? Would you be you can be a pony. That's fine.
No, I almost certainly I'd be a fox.
Okay.
Which I think among furries is kind of is like a cliche.
Yes, it is popular to be a fox, but that doesn't mean it's bad.
Yeah.
We're not Fursona hipsters. We don't say like, oh, you can only be, you have to be a binturog. You have to be a sugar glider.
An axolotl.
You have to be something really obscure.
Well, because you will sometimes see like a furry that has a weird, interesting animal. Yeah. And it's like, oh, that's cool. Like that's cool. I'm trying to think, like a goat or something.
Yeah.
And I do love goats. I'm a fan of pretty much every animal.
Yeah.
Except for crabs. I'm deathly afraid of crabs. That's my only phobia. Although I don't have anything against them. But fox, almost certainly.
Okay. And you can even and so like within furry, you're even allowed to pick like,
Arctic fox.
Arctic fox or a red fox
Arctic
or
fox.
a fennec or whatever. So
I wore an Arctic fox costume once.
Oh.
It was a very white, because the Arctic foxes, of course, they have the shorter, stubbier ears.
Yeah. So to get back to Rock Dog and My Little Pony and stuff, so like one of the themes that like My Little Pony we see in Rock Dog is music bringing people together, and like that I've noticed too is like no matter what dub Rock Dog is that people are watching, they like the music from both. It tends to, like, I've seen like people are like, oh, like I like that. I like that Glorious song. That one's actually the same in both movies, but like they have the rest of the songs in the first movie are different.
Horizon.
Yeah, in
whatever Little Foxy's song is called.
And so like, but when I've talked to people about this movie, one of the things that really stands out is that they like the songs because
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of approachable, the music from another culture. Like, what is your experience as, like, being interested in other media from other cultures? Like, what's the big draw of music? Like, you know, anime and J-pop. Like, people get into J-pop and stuff.
Well, so for me, that's probably the biggest one, is, like, when I was a kid, so I was a child in the 90s, right? Which you can probably date in terms of watching the Ocean Dragon Ball Z dub. I watched the 4Kids Pokemon dub, of course, like everyone my age. And also there was, like, Digimon, there was Sailor Moon. And so as a kid, probably for you as well, when I was a kid, there wasn't, like, an anime, Western animation divide. The anime, it was just all cartoons. And it was all, we came back home from school, and we watched, and in Canada, we have a channel called YTV that, strangely, some Americans are familiar with, which is cool. But,
we get... I live in North Dakota, so we get some of your stations.
Okay, word. But as a kid, you'd come home, literally everyone would come home from school and would watch YTV, and there was a thing called The Zone, which had these two hosts, which are cool. They're also, like, Canadian celebrities. In fact, one of the hosts of The Zone was the voice of Rini on Sailor Moon, or the English dubbed voice.
The Jason Agnew and Tira Sweet, looks like.
Oh, I don't know who those.
I don't know, but that's who it says the current
Sugar.
programming is. But it could be previous ones. But yeah, basically it's like a programming block.
Yeah,
it's like Toonami.
Exactly, and so there were shows like, I mean, Powerpuff Girls was in there. But the big heavy hitters for us as kids, of course, were Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, and Digimon. And there was a real, in the playground, there was the real divide between, like, you know, obviously, like, I was a kid when Pokemon came out. I was, I think, 7. And so Pokemon was a huge, but then all of us hipsters moved on from Pokemon to Digimon, and that was a real coming of age time when we were like, we've got our, like, juice boxes poured into wine glasses or whatever, and we're like, yes, of course, Ty and the gang, Agumon. But Pokemon, no, we're not interested in that anymore. And then Silver comes out, and we're all into it again. Anyway, all that is to say,
well, and it's okay to like Pokemon. Pokemon is a game series primarily, and Digimon is a TV show primarily that happens to have games, and so, like, it's I get it.
But and actually, one of the cool things is that, like, even back then when we were all kids, among my group of friends, Sailor Moon was in there, even though that show was, I guess, in theory, I don't know, like, you get what I mean. Like, in theory, it was a show for girls.
Yeah, that was an interesting case.
Yeah,
Sailor Moon, like the original Sailor Moon, because, like, to look at the marketing, you'd think it was all aimed at girls. But, like, I know a lot of guys who don't watch a lot of girly things who watch Sailor Moon.
Pretty much every
like, it's
boy
in a
I
Bare
know.
Naked Ladies song.
Yeah.
And, like, you know, it's like just part of the cultural milieu.
Totally. And now, of course, probably on playgrounds, maybe not right now, but of the last few years, My Little Pony would have been the equivalent, I suppose. Like, even bigger, a way bigger phenomenon than Sailor Moon probably ever was. All of this to say, I'm sorry, I really like to ramble.
It's okay.
As a kid, obviously anime was the big one, but it wasn't, as kids, I didn't conceptualize it as anime until I was like 12 or 13 and got into the whole thing of finding, and it was VHS tapes at the time, getting, like, Ninja Scroll and stuff, like the more hardcore Cowboy Bebop, like the more hardcore by comparison.
Right, adult anime. Yeah, like grown-up anime.
Then I had when I was older, then it was like, oh, okay, there's anime. Anime is like a thing. But as a kid, it was just, it was all just cartoons. I liked cartoons. I just watched these cartoons. And so, as a result, I was not exposed to a lot of cartoons from countries other than America and Japan.
Right.
If I had to think about it, it wouldn't surprise me if there was the odd show that was actually, like, French and dubbed and I just didn't know about it, because that still happens now, like with what's that show, The Marvelous Ladybug or whatever, like.
Oh yeah, that's I see that on streaming services.
Yeah, like there are shows, because we dub a lot, not that show, but in Vancouver there's still a bunch of dubbing, and I've learned now as an adult that it's not all anime. There's actually French, there's German shows, there's all these other shows that we'll get them from wherever and we'll dub them. And in hindsight, I could probably look it up and be like, oh, that's why that show always had such weird mouths or something. Like,
yeah, mouth flaps, because you're right. Sometimes a show will just give up on getting the mouth flaps right.
Yeah,
Especially, I've noticed that Japanese dubs don't even care sometimes about their own mouth flaps that it was made for. And they're just like, whatever, it's fine. You just see it moving. It's like Star Fox's mouth moving.
Yeah.
Like the Star Fox character's mouth moving. I've been really into like Moomin and Moomin Valley. And
course.
Those are Finnish.
Yeah.
And so like, but they're dubbed into English. And so like, but you don't think of it. Like I had a friend who had a VHS tape of Moomin, and I faintly remembered it, but it didn't make any I was just like, oh, I didn't know. I couldn't have told you that was Finnish.
Yeah.
I didn't know. I was like, 7.
Right. Well, of course, and also, like, if we're being honest, even the shows that are very clearly Western, Simpsons, Family Guy, those are animated in like Korea, and so it obviously it all breaks apart, right? Where it's like, oh, the show there's very few things
that are sharply delineated as this is exclusively a Canadian program. This is exclusively
totally.
You'd have to like I'm trying to think of like because the things that we think of as like Canadian, we'd be like, oh, the raccoons. Well, but like
the raccoons.
Of course. I'm sure that other countries were involved at some point in the production of the raccoons. And so like,
well, the one character wore like he wore like a Maple Leafs jersey or something. I think. Like,
oh my gosh,
there was a lot of that's funny. I've never really thought about what it must have been like for Americans watching Canadian shows, because there are a few, right? Like, probably the biggest, like, my favorite Canadian cartoon when I was a kid was called What's with Andy, which stars Ian Corlett, by the way, who was the original English voice of Goku. But sometimes you'll meet an American that's like, oh yeah, I know that show, but that might just be Canada. I'm trying to think. I don't know. You mentioned the raccoons, whatever they're called.
Well, and there's just stuff like that. Like people, what was it, like Under the Umbrella Tree, I think is Canadian.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember that song.
Stuff like that. Yeah. Do you ever wonder what could happen under the umbrella tree?
Yes.
Like,
I do wonder.
Weird stuff. Right.
Did you have Mr. Dress Up? Did you ever see Mr. Dress Up? Because that was a CBC
I feel like I've heard of it.
Because that show's weird.
I feel like I've.
Well, just because that guy, I've forgotten his name. I should know because he's like a Canadian icon. But he he briefly worked for Mr. Rogers, and then came to Canada. And Mr. Dress Up is like the Canadian Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers.
Yeah, no, I remember this now. Ernie Coombs.
Yeah. And so he was cool. And as a kid, I loved that show. Don't get me wrong, like, Mr. Rogers reigns supreme. I think Ernie himself would tell you that too. But as a really little, this is way before Pokemon. Like when I was a really little kid watching like Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers and stuff. But Mr. Dress Up was a good, Mr. Dress Up was the Digimon to Mr. Rogers' Pokemon, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, and like there's something to be said for I want more of this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like I want another thing in this genre, and it doesn't matter if it's exactly the same. Like
totally.
So like I mean, when I was a kid, I totally participated in the Pokemon versus Digimon debates. But like really now as a grown up, I'm more inclined to be like, well, whatever. Like it's good to have more of the things that we like.
Yeah. Well, and even like in high school, because I'm remembering that pop punk song that you showed me. Maybe I shouldn't spoil what it is.
No. We can. So Jingpa has a cover of Glorious that is like a pop punk rendition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it sounds amazing.
We'll put a link in the description.
It's incredible. And it just reminds me, like when I was in high school, like I was really into that, like the pop punk emo. Like, and it's similar to Pokemon Digimon. There was like Fall Out Boy and My Chemical Romance and these bands of that time. And like in a similar sense, when I look back now, like as a kid well, I wouldn't have liked being called a kid at the time, but I was a
Right,
teenager.
but as a teenager, whatever, yeah.
I was hardcore Fall Out Boy fan, and I
Yeah.
loved. It wasn't the same because I loved My Chemical Romance, but Fall Out Boy was like my real go-to. Looking back on it, I think, looking back at the albums, I think My Chemical Romance was better. I'm sorry to say it.
Mm-hmm.
I like when I listen to, especially like the Black Parade and those albums, they just hit this. Point is, for all your listeners, the Black Parade was a very significant album for me, and when I look back, I'm like, yeah, that's probably better than everything Fall Out Boy ever released.
I think Black Parade, wasn't that the one where everyone started the joke about My Chemical Romance that you follow all of the song titles with the word mom?
I've never heard that.
Famous last words, mom.
Yeah, that's probably that's.
I think that's right about that time.
And let me tell you, as someone that was a listener of that music at the time, as a big fan, that's accurate.
Yeah, this is how I disappear, mom.
You can't do that with Fall Out Boy. Doesn't work.
Right?
The same
Yeah,
way.
and because that was always the joke with My Chemical. Yeah, I think that that was always the joke with My Chemical Romance. Okay, so important question: like what kind of music would Bodhi be into?
Oh my gosh! Well, it's funny because the two movies, like if you listen to Glorious, and then you listen to Take Me Home and Horizon, like if you listen to the music, the Matt Gerard music in 2 does have a distinctly different tone to the first movie. I think they're all good. Like all of the songs could be played in a row and they're all fine. But there is a bit of a difference. Like Glorious has much more of a kind of a folk, you know what I mean? It has like a lot of delay on the vocals. It feels almost it has that acoustic guitar that's kind of keeping the song moving the whole time pretty much. Whereas like Take Me Home, they sound much more electric and rock focused. So for Bodhi, in terms of modern bands, I don't know. I think that Bodhi, he would certainly be a fan of classic rock. I think we know that for sure. So Bodhi probably, I would love for Bodhi to hear like Pink Floyd or Led Zeppelin.
Right.
I like to think that Bodhi would like Rush, my Canadian heroes.
Right.
I like to think he'd like Rush. In my mind, because
they still have CDs in my center console of my car.
Yeah, like I like to think that Bodhi would appreciate progressive rock. And so like Bodhi, although like he hasn't discovered prog rock yet. And obviously Angus is there. But Angus clearly has a lot of catching up Bodhi to do. It's true. If Bodhi hasn't been allowed to hear music most of his life. Well, but and so certainly the Rolling Stones, right? Certainly probably early Beatles. You know, once we got into more of the mid to late catalog of the Beatles, I would argue, this is controversial, I would argue that some of that stuff is actually like the beginning of prog. Mm-hmm. It's like proto-prog kind of music, some of that stuff. So I hope that Bodhi would be into it. I like to think that Bodhi would sit along and listen to Abbey Road with me. I don't know. Right. Certainly I hope he would like Pet Sounds. Right. How popular is Pet Sounds among the furry community? I haven't in particular heard it, but it would be an ironic and fun choice. You guys should make at like someone's booth. Make a furry version of that album cover where it's like Brian Wilson, the petting zoo. Yeah, the petting zoo. I'm sure that in universe, Dharma would totally be the one to introduce the Beatles because she has that one. She has like some weird variant of that Paul McCartney the bass. Bodhi. I do like, by the way, that Bodhi plays because he plays a Scattercaster, as we know. And in fact, when I was a teenager and first started getting into guitar, I bought a Stratocaster, and so I do like my Stratocaster is. It's not cherry red; it's more of a deeper red. But that's the actual pretty much the guitar that I got. The strings don't. That's amazing. The strings don't glow blue when I play it, but not yet. But I'm not Bodhi. But that's amazing. Like and like it's because that's kind of the go-to guitar. Like that's even like the emoji guitar. Yeah, as well it should be. That's the guitar that came with Rock Band. Let me tell you, talking about video games, Bodhi would like Rock Band. There's no doubt
Oh my
about that.
gosh. Yeah.
Let me think. Dharma, as we see in the sequel, Dharma's very political. And so
Right, I love it.
I think she'd be really into like I think a lot of the political stuff. I think all the way from Rage Against the Machine, Rise Against, but I think maybe like Utah Phillips. Like I think Dharma can get with all of it, you know? The you know, the whole the union kind of songs. There's
Well, like, and songs that are like, right, yeah, songs that are like about social change.
Absolutely.
Like like protest songs and march songs and stuff like that is kind of in that same category.
Totally.
Yeah, I could see it. And like I was actually really pleased with this movie's direction that they went with Dharma, because in the first one I like it. She's great. She's very nice. She's very sweet. She's like the only person who is like she also thinks Bodhi's insane, but at least she's like, well, let's be nice to him.
Yeah, let's like she's tolerable. Or tolerate.
Let's tolerate this nice dog who seems well-meaning, but he is completely, convinced that he needs to tell us that he actually knows a rock star. But like, and then in this one, she's like feisty, and I'm like, oh wow, good for you. Like, why not? I welcome, feisty Dharma.
Totally.
Because like, and in the first movie, like, they kind of like switched roles in this movie, because the first movie Bodhi had like a flat arc. He didn't really like change or grow a ton.
Yeah,
compared
the rest
to other
of the world
characters.
changes
Like,
around him.
Yeah, he already had it figured out. Whereas like, and then because Dharma is like the character who's like the conventional, like, oh, this is how things work. You have to come here and play until you get noticed and you get signed or whatever. You can't just know someone. That doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And so like, you can't just walk up to his door and, and ask, hey, will you teach me how to be a rock and roll singer? Well, like, and then like in the second one, they like basically switch where like, she has to teach him the same lesson he learned in the first movie, because he's found his own weird way of losing sight of it. Like, he now like wants to share his music with the world like his dad wants, and like, Linux in Disguise wants and stuff. And so like, she has to then be like, no, you have to actually have this be authentic, because that's like a big theme of the movie is like,
oh my gosh,
your music has to be authentic. Like, you have to be performing the art that you actually care about,
totally,
or it won't resonate with people.
Like when I actually got the script for Rock Dog 2, here I am. I've watched Rock Dog 1 5 billion times, and we get the scripts in advance. So I'm reading through it, of course, just doing my prep. Actors prep differently, but I have my little way of doing it.
So what's your deal? What do you do to prep?
Oh, well, okay. So like for an audition, what I'll typically do depends on how long I have. For a lot of auditions, you only have a few days. Sometimes you only have like you have until the end of that day. Sometimes if you're really unlucky. My prep typically will be, for animation auditions, you often get, it really varies. Sometimes you only get the lines. You literally get just your character's lines with no context. No description of the scene, no description of the context of the conversation you're having. Like, you'll just have, like, let's say the line, if you're really unlucky, this has happened, the line is just like, uh-oh. It's like some super...
Yeah.
And you're like, what the hell is that?
I think I saw the voice actor for Commander Shepard from Mass Effect.
Oh yeah, Mark Meer
talking about that, where it's just like and then I got a bunch of random dialogue.
Oh yeah, and
had to read all of it.
Oh,
because video games, I think that happens even more.
So for video games, yeah, I can speak to video games even more from Dragalia Lost and stuff like that. Because that's Dragalia Lost doesn't have cutscenes, well, but in the way that obviously Mass Effect does. So it's literally an Excel spreadsheet of lines, and that's also fun because what you do for video games, you like impact sounds. You just like
right.
So you'll do that for like minutes, it's like so we can get enough and then let me tell you.
Oh no! Like we had Jameson Boaz on here, and his main job is being like an audio effects like supervisor or something, and so he is just forever making like the noise. I played the noise of the guy on the left in this scene in Berserk of this guy who died
Right.
instantly.
No, that's brilliant. Well, actually, because I was inspired. I have a friend who is he works for a company called Power Up Audio, which is a they do sort of, I don't know how to describe their company. They're like a video game audio company.
Library?
Well, not a library, because they'll do like bespoke audio for games. So they did Darkest Dungeon, they did Celeste, if you know that game.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like they've done some huge indie games. They did Into the Breach.
Yeah.
And so the different but I saw him once. Because I was hanging at his place and he was doing some sounds, and it was like some kind of little gremlin creature or something that he's doing. And all it was for this character, it was just sounds of satisfaction. So like as I just described, when we as actors, like when we go up to do impact, it'll often be like we'll go like that. He went up, I saw him recording on the microphone, he just went he just did it over for like a long time. No. But I was like, that blew my mind, because he's like, yeah, I'm just going to do as many as possible, and then, I'll listen to them and I'll decide. And I was like, of course, like, that's so practical, like, because it's so stupid. But like, as actors, we're like, okay, we have to do, okay, here we go, light impact. Okay. And we're like thinking about it, because we're like, okay, let me think. Okay, was that good? Okay. Okay.
But then he just did them all and sorted them later?
He just went. And it was just a real lesson for me, and like, especially for those sounds. This is a lesson that maybe you shouldn't have to learn, but it's like, oh yeah, for those kinds of just like sound effects, don't like prep them. Don't think about them forever. You don't need to. Just give them a bunch of them, and just leave a little gap in between. So
that you can edit them.
Yeah, don't spill the lines into each other. Anyway, so for an audition, if I get the lines, depends on the number of lines or whatever. Ideally, it's an actual, like, you'll often, but not always, which really sucks, but you'll often get a drawing of the character, at the very least, maybe drawings of the other characters. You'll get a description of the show, and then you'll get your actual lines. And I've had a few auditions, actually, so far this year. It's been good. They've been actual scripts that I can read, and I can see, like, like if you've seen a script before, there's, like, the description of the action, there's things like that. That's great, because then I can see, like, oh, we're at this guy's house. Okay, I'm in the base. Like, that can inform the context. If you don't have that, then in those cases, for me anyway, like if you get a line like, I don't think so, and it's just this line. That's the line. And I don't know the context. I don't know why I'm saying it. Well, fortunately, I've watched a lot of cartoons. You have too, all of us. And so we're like, I don't think so. Like, I can imagine the way they might want that. I don't think so. Like, I can give them, I can imagine how they probably want that line. Or like, that's gotta hurt. Or something. Do you know what I mean? Like some kind of cliche.
Yeah, like, because those are in our repertoire as things characters say in cartoons.
Yeah. Ideally, the script for the audition isn't just stuff like that. Sometimes. But ideally, it's meatier than that. And so then what I'll do is I'll read it through a few times. Like, just trying to derive, every possible way. Okay, because, sometimes on your third or fifth reading of the text, you might be like, oh, actually, there's a comma there, or something you missed. Then I will do this. There's a famous acting coach called Stanford, I think it was Stanford or Sanford Meisner, and there's a lot of Meisner techniques. One of them is to repeat something over and over and over again. And you can actually find there's videos on YouTube of people saying things to each other, and they'll just repeat over and over and over again. And different teachers do this in different ways. When I did some Meisner training, what I got from that was when I repeated the lines over and over and over again, I think of it two ways. For starters, I'm saying the line in so many different ways. I'm putting the tense on different words. So I'm seeing I might discover some especially because remember, in the context of an audition, I also want to,
like, demonstrate range.
to some extent, yes. I think I do think it is a mistake for actors to think about that too much, but to some extent, you want to, distinguish yourself from other people. I would say probably a better way of putting that is I want to make sure that when I'm submitting my MP3 of my audition, that what I'm sending them is my version. Do you know what I mean? That it's not, I didn't just throw it out there. I've been thinking about this for a long time. I've done that line multiple ways, and I've said, this is the way that this is how I think it should be done. Because keep in mind, with an audition, not so in the case of Rock Dog 2, this wasn't the case, but for most auditions, you don't have to worry about your own spin. Because there are actors that I think push it too far and obsess over doing an audition in a way that nobody else is going to do, which can be kind of like, okay, but now you sound like a freak. Like you're saying every line in these bizarre ways, and you know what I mean? Like
they'll remember you, but they may not end up hiring you for the job because they think you're a lunatic.
Don't obsess over the fact that other people are auditioning for this. Like, you've been invited. Here you go. We want to hear what your crack. And casting directors and directors, a lot of people don't have faith in them. They don't think that they have the ability to imagine anything. Like, they think if you, for example, I did an audition recently. I shouldn't say, but if you see like a word and you're not sure on the pronunciation, if it's here's an example, like Coruscant. You know, like in Star Wars, the planet of Coruscant.
Yeah.
Well, if you're seeing that in a script for the first time, and that word has never been said out loud, as far as you know, you don't know how to say that. I know that, I believe, because I'm a complete loser, and I remember the Phantom Menace DVD extras. I have them burned into my brain. That Jake Lloyd in his audition said Coruscant. Right? Now, of course, that's like in science, it's like, oh, it's Coruscant. But of course, what the hell is this word, right? It could be Coruscant. He doesn't know that it's, like, no one's ever said this before. We didn't know that it was Coruscant until that movie came out. So he booked the part because when he's doing his audition and he says Coruscant, George Lucas and the other people involved in casting, they know that he doesn't know how to pronounce the word, and that's not going to lose him the role. Do you know what I mean? Like, because they're like, oh.
But he said it with conviction.
It's like do you like the performance? And if you like the performance, then okay, when you're on set, you just remind him that it's Coruscant. You can just tell him, like, oh yeah, it's Coruscant. Don't say it that way. And he'll do it. And he did. Point is, of course, I love to ramble. In terms of Meisner, when I've got an audition, I will literally say the lines. I'm not even acting. I'll just say them over and over again. Because and this is kind of my own philosophy, this is going to sound really weird. I believe that when you're seeing an actor or you see someone reading something off a page, and they've never said those words before, they've never said this sentence before, even if they're really good, and this doesn't really apply to improv, this is if they're trying to, like on SNL, they're looking at a cue card, something like that. Actually, SNL hosts, like athletes, people that aren't used to reading scripts, you can see this in them, that they're saying these words, and something's weird. The words just aren't sitting in their mouths properly. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not coming out naturally like it's spontaneous speech. And I believe that to some extent, I believe that one way to get past that is literally just to when you have a script, those words, these sentences, even aside from your actual performance, just saying those sentences, just running it through, almost like, you're sanding down a corner or something. You just get your mouth used to saying those words in that order. And so I'll spend a long time doing that. Like just watching a show or watching YouTube and just saying whatever the line is, just running through it so that my mouth, especially if it's like a model, like if it's weird, do you know what I mean? Like if it's a weird tongue twister, then this helps even more. And then from that point, when I'm going into the performance, it's That's really hard to describe. I think probably. Have you done like voice acting like in like fan projects or I don't know. I don't know much about you. Like I know you're an author.
It's okay. So I have done voice work for the first thing I ever did voice work for was do you ever play the Elder Scrolls Morrowind? Yeah. I did a mod. I was the voice of the Moogles in the mod
Kupo kind of thing.
And so literally it was just me saying Kupo. Yeah. Oh, have a good day, Kupo. And things like that. And I kid you not, years later, like this is like 15 years later, I am at a convention and a guy I've met a couple times, Mog, his Fursona's a Moogle. And he's like, and he's not even really paying attention in the conversation. And I start telling this story, and I switch into the Moogle voice, and I start talking like a Moogle, and blah, 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 kupo, kupo. And he turns, and he's what? That was you? He's like, I still quote those when I'm acting like a Moogle, because it's part of my, like, Moogle, my sense of what a Moogle talks like. Because they don't tend to have a lot of speaking lines in the games. And I'm like, oh, well, good. I'm glad that you're my first fan of my
That's
voice
great,
acting.
Dude.
But yeah, that's the kind of voice acting work I've been
That's legit, dude. That's legit. The thing about the mod, right? I've been thinking, recently I started playing Skyrim again, thinking about Starfield.
Yeah.
And I've never installed, but I'm very aware of the mod Inigo. I think that's him. He's a mod follower for Skyrim. He's a Khajiit guy that you find in the Rift in jail. And I've never installed it. Are you familiar at all with Inigo?
I'm not, but I know about Skyrim. So like, just for the sake of our listeners, give us the basics.
Okay. So Inigo, how do I put this? So in Skyrim, if you've played it or whatever, you can have these followers. You have these companions that follow you. And the one that probably most players have experienced is Lydia, who becomes your house Carl when you become the Thane of Whiterun.
And is sworn to carry your burdens. I'm
sworn to carry your burdens. Yeah, exactly. And there's other ones, they're following you around and they do stuff. And you can tell them, you can say, go attack that guy sometimes and different things. So, obviously, there are tons of mods for Skyrim. Mods are, in fact, like with all due respect to Bethesda, mods are why I'm coming back and playing it again for like the 1500th time. And there are modded followers. They have varying amounts of integration into the code or the lore. Inigo, and I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, he's like Inigo Montoya from The Princess Bride.
Oh, no.
He is...
Okay, now I get it.
He is a Khajiit guy. If you know the Khajiit, they're the cat people. Oh, I'm sure your listeners are familiar with the Khajiit.
They'll keep up on this part. Don't worry.
So Inigo, I'm sure many people listening are familiar with this guy because he's kind of. I think it's fair to say that of all the mod companions in Skyrim, I think he's far and away the most famous. There are lots of people, from what I can tell, in my Elder Scrolls Facebook groups. There's loads of people where that's their only mod, is him. Is they add him. He integrates into the lore very easily, because I think the creator has done a lot of custom stuff. Like, Inigo is a way more advanced AI character than, like, anyone else in the entirety of the game. All this is to say that he has, like, thousands of voiced lines. And I've been thinking about that recently because many, many people who talk about Inigo talk about that they love his performance, that this actor, I wish I knew who it was. And I'm not like an authority on Inigo. I'm just, you talking about your Moogle mod. It's like, it did occur to me that this dude who's the voice of Inigo, I don't know who they are, but it's probably like a really good way to get experience. And like, as far as I can tell, this dude who did Inigo has done the same thing that all the other casts in Skyrim have done. This is video game acting. He responds to
Yeah.
And apparently Inigo has responses for tons of situations. Like, there's virtually no way that you'll hear all of his lines because he will react to all the different ways that you can finish all the different quests.
Because the way that for the people who don't know how Elder Scrolls games work for voice acting, for example, like greetings, like if you walk up to a character and they just have an idle thing they say to you, like that is based on their disposition to you. So they'll have 10 different things they say just when you walk up.
Yeah.
That extends to all of the other stuff they say in the case of this Inigo mod and in, the built-in characters. So it's uploaded by, the Inigo is uploaded by Smart Blue Cat.
Well, that makes sense. Maybe he's a listener.
Maybe.
If he is.
We'll have to, from the UK, says so. Real name, Gary.
Gary, you did a really good job.
Good work, Gary.
I would love, if there's an opportunity for Bodhi and Inigo to meet in a situation that is safe for work, I would jump at the opportunity. That's another thing. This actually is a good, I don't know if you want to use this anecdote, but Jason really did, when I was working on Rock Dog 2, I owe a lot to Jason because him and I went for lunch in the middle of the day. We both went to the Subway across the street, and I just vented to him about how nervous I was.
Yeah.
And it was like this little therapy session we both had. We also both had like meatball subs, which isn't really like, I don't know if that's the most responsible thing to be eating in the middle of a voice recording session, but it was just like, screw it, man. It's like I need to work off some stress here. I'm like starring in this movie, and I just need a meatball sub to get me through the day.
When I was taking voice lessons, like singing lessons from a novelty singer who goes by the name of Milo Hudson-Buehler in college.
That's a great name.
I know. He's like a novelty singer and like an opera singer. But I was like talking to him about something, and he's like, well, and you know why there are no skinny divas, right? And I'm like, why? He's like, because after you work that hard singing, you don't want to sit down and eat a salad. You want a steak. And I'm like, oh.
I get that.
He's like, because you worked hard. You're an athlete. You exerted yourself.
Yeah.
And now you need to rebuild. And so, yeah, I understand the desire for the meatball sub.
Well, and it was also just, it was comforting, and it was like, it was a little bit of...
That's probably right. No, meatball subs are a relatively healthy coping mechanism.
Yeah. And it was, and also because Jason, so I can tell you, like, everyone in that room, not everyone, but many of them had been my teachers. Like I said, and Jason in particular. Jason, a good story about Jason's class. Anyone who wants to take Jason's classes with Jason Simpson on video game voice acting. I've taken so many classes. My resume at this point, also because I don't have that many credits, right? Like I'm kind of building up. So my resume is like half of my resume is just training, because I've taken so many classes, so many voice acting classes in every context, in so many different permutations. I took a voice acting class with, I took a voice acting for video game class with Jason Simpson, who is an incredible voice actor. I think it's fair to say my favorite role of his is Viren in The Dragon Prince. If you've seen Dragon Prince.
Yeah, the new Netflix.
The Netflix series from the creators of Avatar: The Last Airbender. So, I took this class with Jason, video game voice acting, and I've taken tons of classes. I've taken pretty much every voice acting class that is in Vancouver. I'm sure there's ones that I've missed, but pretty much. It's like if you're familiar with Vancouver voice acting lessons, which I don't know, not a lot of people are, and you looked at my resume, you'd be like, yeah, that's all of them. Jason's class, and I've told him this, when I took Jason's class, at the end, I kind of felt like, I don't really know if I learned that much from that class. I was like, yeah, like it didn't really, we went through different things, and it was interesting, and I'm glad I got to meet Jason Simpson. He's a cool guy. I don't really think I got that much from it. Anyway, then, a few months later that year, I booked Dragalia Lost, the game for Nintendo. And when I was there in that session for Dragalia, where I had 2 characters, I was so, and I told him this, I was so unbelievably thankful that I had taken Jason's class. Jason's video game voice acting class was by far the best class I ever had. Like, when I actually had that video game session, if I hadn't taken Jason's class, I would have been totally screwed. I would have not known what was going on. And because of his class and that training, when I was doing Dragalia Lost, it was like every other class I'd ever taken didn't even matter. Just because of how useful that. And so I was like, the one time that I doubted Jason, I was an idiot for doubting him. And so I told him, like, by the way, your class has proved to be essentially the most useful.
Well, and like, it's funny because like we don't always know until we look back, like what was actually a really educational, interesting, informative experience.
Totally.
Because like, it's just, this is what's happening right now. Oh, well, okay. So you were talking about your experience getting on board with this movie and stuff.
Oh, so however many millions of years ago, before I talked about my acting process, I was talking about when I got the script for Rock Dog 2.
Yeah.
Because the very first thing I did, like I do with any script, is I'm just reading it. It's very tempting to think about how I might perform something, but the first time I'm reading, I try to squash that sense and just read it as a story. And, imagine it in my head, especially because I'd now watched Rock Dog 1 so many times and I was a fan. I was like, here we go. Here's the sequel. I was so struck by the storyline and the fact that, like, this, like, if we're making a sequel to Rock Dog, like, I don't know early on, I'm like, oh, what does that mean? Is it like, Bodhi goes to the Bahamas? Or like, is it like, oh, the Bodhi goes to space? Is it like, do you know what I mean? Like, what is this going to be? But Rock Dog 2 is like the direct sequel and the same characters appear.
And they're having a continuation of the same feelings and like emotional arcs.
Yeah. And there's new characters, like we meet the grandparents and stuff like that. But for the most part, aside from, I've forgotten their names. I know Norbu is the granddad. But the 2 grandparents, there's them, there's Wei and Shumei, the 2 red pandas. And then there's also, of course, Lang, who it turns out is Linux. Aside from those people, even Carl comes back, right? Like
even Trey comes back. I was shocked that Trey came back. And like, I don't know, Dharma has no particular like fondness for this former bandmate because she just lets him get thrown in a trash can.
Yeah. Well, I think there's probably...
I think she's tired of his nonsense, I suspect.
Yeah, people that have been in...
I think he seems like he was kind of a jerk.
Let's be honest, and I am a guitarist. I think most bassists would like to see the guitarist in their band get thrown into a dumpster.
Oh, no. So, like, you have to understand that, like, being in the Rock Dog fandom has taught me the expression of this person is playing bass. Like, this person metaphorically is playing bass for this social group because that's how people talk about Dharma. They're like, oh yeah, they're the supportive friend who does all the not very, glamorous work.
Right. Holding it up kind of thing.
Yeah, that person's playing bass for this event. Like, let's thank them.
I didn't know that. Yeah, that's great. Especially, listen, I talked about being a fan of Fall Out Boy, where the bass player was the front man, and I would love to see bass, not being so disparaged, like in the discourse.
Well, it's like being a healer in an RPG.
Sure.
Like, someone has to. Speaking of like guitar stuff in universe and like the fandom, like I have to now, having seen the second movie, I have to assume that like shred-offs are like a legally binding thing in the Rock Dog universe.
Well, in the real world,
people take them very seriously.
Yeah,
he's clearly some sort of savant. Like in the show, like Bodhi routinely learns new guitar methodologies and stuff. He's like Po from Kung Fu Panda for Kung Fu. Like clearly Bodhi is like comparison. Some sort of savant. Yeah, like he just is naturally good at this.
Yeah. Did you know that person that plays Dharma was Rainbow Dash. That's
Yes,
crazy.
that was
That's
amazing.
crazy to me. It's Rainbow Dash.
And, like, it works, like, surprisingly. I was kind of like, oh, okay. Like, I was a little bit like, I'm a little used to, you know, like, I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's just going to be, like, a you know, a little bit more Rainbow Dash voice, whatever. I'm like, no, I didn't even notice until halfway through.
You know what?
Because I'd forgotten.
Because I'm hesitant to call myself a brony, frankly. No offense, bronies. But you've committed some
just
crimes.
An expert in all of the most obscure My Little Pony stuff. I'm not like a brony though.
Well, I'm a fan of cartoons, and so I think if you're a fan of cartoons generally, if you have the stomach for being able to watch kid shows like Dragon Prince, like whatever, like if you can watch that stuff, and I like cartoons, so I can be like, oh, this is a great show. This is great for kids. Whereas tons of losers when they're grown up, they're like, oh, I can't watch this. What is this? I only watch, whatever. And it's like, whatever, man. I'm into entertainment. But My Little Pony, that scene where Bodhi and Dharma are like fighting, that's the scene I think where like when she starts yelling that Ashley.
Yeah, no, that's when I remembered she was Rainbow Dash.
It starts to sound like Rainbow Dash.
Oh, that's right.
And so for me as a fan, like I'm a fan of her, I'm a fan of the show. It was very much like I'm just getting like yelled at by Rainbow Dash. It's like Rainbow Dash is disappointed in me.
Right. Rainbow Dash is saying I've sold out.
I remember that when I saw that scene in the final movie, it was like, oh, I remember exactly this because most of the time I don't think that Dharma does sound exactly like Dashy.
No. It literally took me until that scene as well to be like, oh man,
totally.
This is Rainbow Dash's voice actor.
Well, and you know what's funny is that I actually find not that Dharma's not screaming, but in a lot of, I think about Troy Baker. Troy Baker's a good example because you can have like Pagan Min compared to that guy from the Lord of the Rings game, compared to what's his face? Joel from Last of Us, compared to what's his Sam Drake? Was that? Anyway, Nathan Drake's brother. When you compare those characters in all those games, I think maybe not Pagan Min, but Troy Baker, he'll have these distinct voices for all the characters, but when he yells, it starts to sound like Troy again. And I think that's kind of universal for a lot of...
That is. I think like you're using a different part of your throat.
Yeah.
Might be part of it.
Yeah. Well, and also just, and there's certain things too, like even, like my character in Dragalia, one of them has a very sort of upper crust English accent, right? He speaks sort of like this the whole time. Not quite like this, it's a bit more animated, but I'm sure that if you were to play that game with the two characters, Wake is the other guy who just sounds more like my natural voice. I'm sure if you heard their barks throughout the game, there would be the odd time
where you wouldn't know which one.
Yeah, where it would be like, well, it's the same actor. Like it's even when you have someone like Tabitha or Billy West, who does, like if you listen back to back to like Fry versus Stimpy, much of the time they sound very different, but occasionally, because it is the same person, and you can't really get. I find that I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's interesting, right? And when you're a fan. Because that's how, like, us as fans of these actors, so often you'll be watching a show, and then you'll think, like, oh, that's Maurice LaMarche. Like you'll suddenly realize because of some inflection or something.
Yeah. Well, that's just part of what makes that person compelling as an actor is, like, they did a thing. Like, it's not like we would be... I think it's kind of interesting talking to voice actors about these different roles, because they're like, oh, and sometimes you can tell it's me. And I'm like, yeah, because you're an actor. Because when, Robert De Niro is on screen, I know it's Robert De Niro, even if he says his name something else.
Yeah.
Like, and that's okay, because that's what I'm here for. Whatever it is.
Totally.
Like, whoever... So, like, I think that's kind of interesting that there's this weird other standard for voice actors where, like, you guys are supposed to be, like, chameleons who can shapeshift into anyone.
Totally.
But
it's rare.
So, yeah, like,
it is
well,
rare.
and even the people who can do it don't think they can do it. Like
Huh.
when I've talked to voice actors who like can totally like sound, oh, like Elizabeth Hannah sounds all sorts of different ways, or like when you talk to people, they're like, oh no, I always sound the same. It's basically me. Oh, okay.
Right.
And so, but yeah, so we mentioned Zootopia briefly. Like one thing that people like was, since we've talked about kids media and stuff, one thing people griped about with the original Rock Dog and then subsequently this one a little bit from what I've heard is that it's like not a super serious movie. And I always find that to be such a funny complaint about movies. Like, well, yeah, you can have a serious movie, but you wouldn't want every movie to be really serious.
No, of course. Well, also,
yes.
the reason I mentioned that and going through this when I got the script for the second movie is
yes.
because the moral of Rock Dog 2, in many ways, is basically like beware of recording contracts.
Yeah.
It's like a morality tale about a musician that gets led down the wrong path because of a record executive and who can't, who takes control of his image. This is a story, like if you read through all the way from Leonard Cohen through Katy Perry, through so many musicians that have been down this path of either a lot of the times it's financial, or in some cases it's public image, like that the artist is not able to communicate with their audience genuinely. They have this weird manufactured personality and all this stuff. That's exactly what Bodhi's going through. And when I read the script for the sequel, I literally, because I really can't stress how much I love Prince. And I was like, oh man, Prince would love this movie. Because he probably wouldn't, but he would like the lesson. Certainly he would like the parental stuff, but he would like the connection between Bodhi and this family, and he would the messages and stuff. But in terms of when it comes to stories about the music industry, I think it's quite daring that they would actually do this, that Lionsgate would go, like, it could so easily, like, imagine how many movies would have told the story about Bodhi, like, just dealt with fame as a good thing, or dealt with, you know what I mean? Like, there have been stories like that, about just, he's getting bigger and bigger, celebrity, like Entourage kind of thing.
Right, he leaves his humble origins and, like, now he's famous and isn't that 100% wonderful.
Yeah, and like there's a lot of stuff going on in the sequel of well, exactly that. Like I like to imagine maybe theoretically like some kid that's watched this movie will grow up to be a musician, will get into one of those boardrooms, right? Like where they're being offered like a 360 deal or something, like one of these odious contracts that we've heard about. And like I like to think that, hey, maybe their memories of Rock Dog 2 will have them think like, I don't know about this. Like I'm gonna get or whatever. Like maybe not, but I like to think so. And so even compared to Zootopia, by the way, is in the running for my favorite film of all time. It's entirely possible. Zootopia is an unbelievable masterpiece, and it deals with very heavy topics, and it makes them digestible for people of any age. I love Zootopia. But, yeah, Rock Dog is not dealing with, like, racial
and Rock
prejudice.
Dog's slightly wackier, too.
It's way wackier. Like, it's for, I would suspect, I don't know for sure, because the DVDs, they don't say, like, for ages 3 and up or whatever. I think Rock Dog is targeted to a younger audience compared to Zootopia, even though obviously Zootopia is fine for kids. But Zootopia is also scarier. Like there are those sequences with the animals that have sort of gone.
Oh yeah, they've
Breaking Bad reference.
They've gotten the flower.
Yeah,
that's making them go crazy.
Yeah, like they're behaving.
The Breaking Bad. Sheep.
Yeah, and like so Zootopia, and none of this is a criticism against Zootopia, but it would be like it's obviously easy to compare the movies because, as we said before, they're similar universe. They're anthropomorphic animals. You could also, and
they
think
came
about
out
this.
after like kind of a drought of not a lot of anthro stuff had come out for a while.
Well, here's the thing. think about this. We were talking about how Bodhi could hang out, who could easily like be next to Judy. Could maybe hang out with Judy or hang out with what was the name of in Zootopia? Is it Giselle? The gazelle. Yeah, the gazelle character.
Yeah.
So like Bodhi could go on tour with Gazelle or whatever. Bodhi could just as easily see Lugosi, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or hang out with the Beastars cast. And like, yeah, Bodhi could exist in that. Bodhi could go to the what is it? The black market or whatever. Like Bodhi could also exist in that world. That's for all the people that are lamenting the fact that Rock Dog, doesn't have deep stuff. Watch Beastars. Beastars is fantastic. That's another show that I love. It's absolutely not for kids, but like part of what I like about Beastars, like when I first started watching it, was actually the fact that I was explaining it to my mom actually, because I think she'd like it, because she likes like Attack on Titan and stuff. She's down. It's good. It's good that you have a cool mom.
Oh yeah, I have the coolest mom.
No offense to the other moms out there, but I was explaining it basically like Beastars. I was like, oh, it's kind of like Zootopia. It's a similar world to Zootopia, but it deals almost like the way that Watchmen is similar to a comic book world or The Boys or something, where it's like, okay, Zootopia, but it deals much more directly with like, well, wait a minute, what are the predators eating, right? And I'm actually, if I had to bet that there was any show, any movie and show that your audience was most likely to be familiar with, I think Zootopia and Beastars is probably take that. So I won't bore you with discussing contextualizing Beastars, but you get what I mean. Like the way that I described Beastars was like, oh, it's like Zootopia, but it deals with the dark side of stuff that Zootopia only implies. Now, if Zootopia only implies that stuff, Rock Dog is just a party. It's like Rock Dog doesn't even go to the places that Zootopia does. I haven't really thought prior to this conversation about the different other anthropomorphic worlds that Bodhi could dwell in, and it's fun to think about.
No, I'm sure that I'm sure this conversation has already spawned 1,000 fan fictions.
Yeah.
Because you're like, oh, you have Zootopia and Rock Dog, you say. Well, that's a fine idea. So, to go back to your idea of, like, prominent people having a brand. So, like, it's weird because, like, in the modern day, we even just have that brand management instinct just as everyone else. Mm-hmm. And so it's, because of, like, social media. Because if you say some terrible, stupid thing, people can find that much later, or like it can blow up or whatever. And so like there's this idea that like, even more so as like a person in entertainment or something, you like there's this instinct to like meticulously maintain your brand and be on brand, and what is my brand, and like what works for me, what I'm able to say wouldn't work for someone else. And that is a difficult road to walk if you're not used to it and you don't have a ton of examples. Mm-hmm. And I kind of think that that's where Bodhi is in the second movie, where he like, unlike say Dharma and Germain, like they know what musicians are supposed to look like, and not just like they can't be as easily taken in by nonsense. And so like I kind of feel like it's interesting because like that is a feeling that we all sort of do now. Like we all sort of kind of work in this like, okay, I'm going to phrase this thing I'm posting publicly in such a way that if my boss saw it, I wouldn't get fired.
Absolutely.
I'm not going to do whatever. Like, and it's not even all bad. It's just this is
You're
the
mindful.
situation.
Yeah.
You have, and that's good in a way. Like it keeps us from being a little bit. It's like there's a time and place to like vent to your friends about how stupid these your boss is or something. But like having it on social media also can help you have perspective. Like I tend to view the internet as like a place where I can experiment being my best self.
Interesting.
Because there's no pressure to have continuity with like previous ways I've thought about stuff, and I'm like, you know what? Someone has posted this comment. let me think about that deeply before I respond to it, and respond with like a very mindful, enlightened answer, even if like part of me is like, well, you don't get it because you're a stupid jerk, like, you know, about this show or whatever. And like that is equally possible to us as internet users and like participants in society, like to be like, okay, well, right, yeah, you can be, you know, a terrible internet denizen.
Absolutely.
You know, you can be, you know, the creature that crawled out of the YouTube comments section, but you can also be really pleasant and you can be really nice because you have all this time to think about your answer because you're typing on a keyboard. And so I also think that there's a lot of value to, like, just like we undervalue kids media, we undervalue comedy.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Yeah, like it's not quite the same level of serious regard that like a drama gets. And that's just kind of a deeply rooted cultural thing. Like, I think that's been around for a while.
Well, also it is funny that you mentioned that, because like talking about kids entertainment or talking about comedy, when you think about the films are shows that people really remember from when they were younger, that stick with them for their whole lives. There's the category of Star Wars and the adventure movies, Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
The Marvel movies are that these days, of course. The Fast and the Furious films. But also people remember their comedies. Like for you and I, something like Superbad, right?
Yeah.
I'm never going to forget when I saw Superbad for the first time. It blew my mind as a kid. And same with like Napoleon Dynamite, which like the internet has run some of those jokes into the ground, but at the time, man, Napoleon Dynamite, Anchorman, these movies, it was unbelievable. And then you can hear, like, my sisters are much older than me, and they like they'll talk about movies like Animal House, or they'll talk about you know, even things that aren't comedies but are lighthearted fare, like The Breakfast Club or whatever, or the original Superman, stuff like that. You know, these are the movies most of the time. This is the first time I've been interviewed, like, in my capacity as an actor, right? So I want to be clear, like, when I'm talking about media in a semi-disparaging way, I'm really not criticizing it. Like, so I'll give you an example, because like I love, I'll be an example of a movie like The Revenant. Okay, love The Revenant. It's a great movie. It's an incredible film, Academy Award-winning film, as it should have been. But it's kind of a go-to example for me of a movie that is really good. Serious affair. It's very affecting when you're watching it, but it's not, in my opinion, it's not like one of these movies like talking about Superbad, where it's like, I can imagine years from now being like,
you'll want to go back.
I'll see it on Netflix and be like, oh, I'm going to watch it again, right? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, The Revenant is not that for me. My goal is to one day win a Golden Raspberry. That would be, every time I do a performance, I'm trying my best. I want you to know that. I want you, anyone listening, to know every performance I've done my best. But if you hate it, if you hate my performance, 1, sorry, hope I do better next time for you. 2, please vote for me in the Golden Raspberries. That's a favor to me. Because I'd take it. I would be thrilled. I would accept it in person, even if I die of COVID.
Right. Well, and that's becoming less likely, thankfully. So like,
it's true. It's true.
Go get your shots, people. Another thing to talk about, like, vintage of people watching this movie. I like that, you know, there are things that like people will get if, like, oh, you know, if they're like our age and they're like, oh, okay, you know, the red pandas are Wayne and Garth. I remember that from old Saturday Night Live reruns or something.
We're not worthy.
But like, right?
Yeah.
And then like, it took me a minute to realize that Linux's logo is the 45 RPM record adapter.
Yeah.
And that must have come up so early in production because it's everywhere.
Yeah.
Like, somebody in the chain of making this movie had to install or pop out from records so many of those that they're like, oh yes, I'm going to use this somewhere someday because it's an artistically interesting object. No, and I'm like, no, that's clearly an 45 RPM adapter that he's wearing around his neck like a medallion. And I'm like, oh, okay, so there's something here for people of, that vintage too. And like, there are a lot. The movie. One thing I noticed about Rock Dog 2 is there are even more jokes about the movie, about the music industry than in the first one.
Oh yeah,
because like the first one was like, oh haha, he's named Fleetwood Yak, but like this one, it's just everyone's constantly just casually dropping all these weird like
turn and face the strange and stuff.
Yeah,
the references.
Like, so
no, it's incredible.
But yeah, like that's why I was like, oh, everyone's having a good time. Like that's part of why I like these movies, is because clearly the people involved are having a fun time. Because like like even the animators, like you can tell that like there's a shot in Rock Dog 2. My favorite background detail in Rock Dog 2 is the gift shop Compa is running in the Snow Mountain that has Bodhi and Dharma mugs. And I'm like, who made these? Who at this weird Dr. Seuss sheep settlement made these? And like all these nicely made keychains. I'm like, who made these? This is great. Like, because he looks like a Funko Pop doll on painted on there. And I'm like, what in the world? And so like, I enjoy when people like or having fun making a thing. Like, and so it's kind of like watching, like, I don't know, Tim Curry act in a movie, because he's clearly having a great time.
Oh my gosh.
Because he's acting like a complete maniac. And so like that's how I feel about comedy and kids movies and stuff in general. Like when people talk about, why do I spend a lot of my day thinking about watching whatever kids movies and stuff like that, because that's often what furry stuff is.
Totally.
I'm like, well, because a lot of it's really, really fun. Like,
yeah.
A lot of it is just plain like fun, and people are having fun making it, and that's totally true for My Little Pony. Like clearly you've actually met them, but like the actors are clearly having a grand old time.
Yes.
In a lot of these things.
Absolutely. Yeah, it would be depressing to meet the person who wasn't. Do you know what I mean? Like, can you imagine if you were like,
oh, I hate it.
Yeah, like that'd be depressing. Like, why? Especially because voice acting, like, it pays okay, but don't get me wrong, like nobody, like,
you're not pulling in a movie star salary.
No, it's not like lucrative, and it takes so long to do. And so if you get to the point that you're doing a movie like this or a show like My Little Pony or whatever, then hopefully you enjoy it. Because if you don't, like, well, then why are you here? Like,
why'd you go through all the trouble?
Yeah, like this, and mind you, of course, there's always ups and downs, and there's stuff that's annoying, and sometimes, honestly, sometimes you can have directors that are abusive and stuff. Like, don't get me, there's all that, but that's certainly not the case for Rock Dog. I know the director from My Little Pony. It's certainly not the case there. Like, that's not the case in anything that we're talking about.
But you can have a bad boss at any job.
Oh, absolutely. So, like, or you can just have even like I'm not going to say, but when I mentioned earlier about how like everyone in Vancouver has been amazing, with some notable exceptions that I won't say, there are times where you can be on a show and you're with an actor that's a jerk, and they bring it down for everyone. But thankfully in Vancouver, that pretty much never happens. Even the people that I'm thinking of, they're not like that. They're not they're not abusive or anything.
Ruining it.
No, they're not like, passive aggressive or anything. Nothing like that. And I think certainly in Vancouver, I can't speak to anywhere else, but I have to imagine in LA as well and stuff, I don't think that your career would survive very long if you were actually really unpleasant to work with.
Yeah. Well, because like it like so many artistic endeavors, if you are giving an A+ performance, but you're a complete jerk, they'll probably eventually catch on to that and hire somebody who can give an A- performance and isn't a jerk.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, yeah. I feel like it's not worth it.
There's very few people, like, in terms of on camera, there's very few people who are they exist. Like, if you hear about a really successful actor that's a real unpleasant person to work with, if they're still working, usually it's because they're like the best actor in the world. There's someone, they're amazing, right? Like, there's someone who just you can't make the movie without. They're the perfect person for this, and they're so amazing at their job that we're willing to tolerate their absurd demands. But
Right.
as soon as that person's star starts to fade even slightly, and there's tons of actors this has happened to, it's like the second that they have an excuse not to cast that person, all of a sudden, all the work evaporates.
They're not in anything.
They're not in anything.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, there'll be other actors. Christopher Plummer comes to mind. Like there's tons of Steve Buscemi. There's tons of actors who they've had big parts, don't get me wrong, but for a long time, job after job after job after job where they've got a little bit here, a little bit there, even if they don't have the biggest role in any given thing, they're always getting work because everyone loves working with them. Bill Hader comes to mind. Bill Hader is one of my favorite actors working right now. I find a lot of inspiration from Bill Hader, frankly, both in Barry and in his voice work. And like Bill Hader, so much of his work has been people just that like him that are like, oh, well, Bill would be good for this. We'll give him this or we'll give him that thing. Like they're putting something in like Superbad. Like he has a little part in Superbad. He has a little part in Tropic Thunder. He has a little part in Hot Rod, right? He has like these things because he's just great. You can tell he's a genuine person. And he's also very talented. And so they're like, yeah, let's see if we can find a part for Bill to play, right? Like,
so a couple things before we wrap up. So do you have any advice for people who want to get into voice acting?
Yeah, sure. So, unfortunately, it's very hard to give general advice.
Yeah.
And it's also hard to give specific advice because the times that I've experimented with, like, you get a lot of direct messages. Here's what I would say. This is just my opinion. That's probably the most important thing to say is that any actor, even if they're really successful, it's just their opinion. And you'll find people that break the mold and get successful in ways that nobody anticipated. And so don't ever be discouraged if anything I say now is like, that doesn't apply to you or whatever. Genuinely don't worry about it. So being a successful voice actor, let me think. Because it should be an easy question to answer, but my mind is buzzing because I've maybe my little life story explained. Like for a long time, I was existing as this person that dreamed of being a voice actor, and I didn't really know, like that final step. I'm in the right city. I know how to do it. I know the stuff, but like what is missing? And I'm very my heart goes out to anyone that is in that same position, is like knows they could be a voice actor and wants to do it, and it's like it's so confusing. And now on this side, and to be clear, I'm very aware. Like yes, I'm star of this movie, and I'm very pleased to be Rock Dog. But you can just look at my IMDb compared to the other people. Like I consider myself sort of certainly early in my career here, and for all I know, I'll never book another thing this big again. And I'm not saying that in a depressing way. I mean, honestly, you never know. Nevertheless, if I could give advice, the truth is that when you're on this side, once you're here, you've had some credits, and now you're getting the auditions. When people, when casting directors are thinking of voice actors, you're included, right? They're sending stuff to you as well. The truth is that the entire career makes no sense. And no one really knows. Everyone that has successfully made a career for themselves kind of through tooth and nail, like they clawed their way into it. And there's always things that you did that nobody else had to do. And I don't mean anything gross, but you know what I mean? There's you have to listen to your gut sometimes and go for it. But generally speaking, in terms of performance, I recommend, if you can, if you watch a lot of cartoons, whatever they are, if you watch a lot of cartoons, that's good, but really listen to the acting. And I recommend, don't worry about matching the voice, because a lot of people get obsessed with thinking, it's all having like weird voices or whatever. Don't worry about that. Think about the inflection of a character. I'm trying to think of an example. Nothing comes to mind.
Rainbow Dash saying 20% cooler could have been a completely forgettable line.
Okay, so Ashley, and of course I can't do Ashley Ball's voice, of course, but it's like, this has to be about 20% cooler. I think something like that is how she did it. I recommend you watch a show. Don't worry about matching the voice quality. Think about those inflections, because the thing that I've seen more often than not, both in classes and when I have gigs, and now that I'm on the other side and I'm watching someone who, like, I'm so self-conscious here. Like, by the time I got to Rock Dog, I had taken so many classes that even though I was new, I had a lot of training, and so I wasn't new the way that some people that I've seen since, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like I had done mock prelay sessions. I had done lots of stuff. I'd done some indie things. I'd done Dragalia Lost. I'd done a bunch of gigs. And so even with Rock Dog, it was still intimidating. It was still my first time doing something of this magnitude, but it wasn't my first thing ever. So when I've seen people where it's their first thing ever, the single biggest mistake that they make, people they can't impersonate the way that people talk in cartoons. And so they'll give a line. So they'll be like, it needs to be about 20% cooler. Like, they'll say something like that. They just say the line. And it's like, the thing is that I swear, watch the show, because the way that they're talking really isn't the way that you would talk normally, like one-on-one. It's kind of just sort of enhanced a little bit. Do you know what I mean? It's not like when we're just having this conversation, it's not just like normal talking. And maybe it sounds so silly, but it's true. And then when you're in studio with someone and I feel so bad, because the truth is, the worst situation to be in is when you're an actor in a show and someone's struggling, because it can be, depending on the circumstances, it can be really inappropriate to try to help them. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, just honestly, it can be, I do whenever I can, but just the reality of working in show business is sometimes you can't. Like, I can't cut off the director. Do you know what I mean? Like, the director, that's their job, to help this person. And so there's times where, like, I God, it's traumatic. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's just times where, and I'm sure this happens on set as well, you just can't, you see someone struggling and you just can't cross that line. It would be inappropriate for an actor to talk to another actor, to take that kind of mentorship spot in that, which is one of the reasons, like, when I mentioned going to Subway with Jason, he didn't give me acting advice per se, but, like, then it was an opportunity for me with this mentor of mine to just talk about what's happening, right? Because we're the only ones
right, because
there.
you're peers.
We're peers, and we're no longer in front of the producers and the director and stuff like that. We can just talk and be like, this is crazy. Right? Like, we can go like, wow, there's a lot going on. Like, anyway, I hope that's helpful. Like, with the sincerely, also, there's videos you can find on YouTube. If you look up, like, videos of people doing voice acting, so much of it is staged. Like, a lot of that stuff, like, if you look up, like, the behind the scenes for a lot of Disney movies, I think Zootopia probably has them. Like, if you look at those, there's shots where there's the actor and they're in a studio. Let me tell you, if you're watching a video, maybe you've seen these, maybe you haven't. If you're watching a video where the actor is talking and the director is in the same room, there's a bunch of these. For a bunch of Disney movies and DreamWorks movies, there are these, like, behind the scenes, and the director is, like, with them in the same room. Those are staged. There's no way.
That's why their hair is perfect.
Yeah, exactly. There's no way. And it can be helpful. Like, don't get me wrong, because the actor, it's not useless, because the actor is kind of, they're doing an impersonation of what the actor was doing in the session, and whatever. But what you can sometimes find is actual behind the scenes. There's a few, I've seen a video once of Family Guy. There was a bunch of people doing Family Guy. There's a video, I'm trying to think. There's one of My Little Pony, but it's very hard to find, and I don't remember where it was. It was very hard to find, and it was My Little Pony. And it was the scene where, what's the zebra? Is it Zecora?
Yeah.
So it's the episode where Zecora comes to town and all the ponies are reacting to her. And that, if you can find that behind the scenes video, that, as far as I can tell, that's real. That looks
Yeah.
exactly the way, like, if that was, it's a different cast with some exceptions, but like if that was Rock Dog, if that was anything else, that's what it looks like. That's what they're doing. You'll also see in that video, Tabitha St. Germain is reading Twilight Sparkle's lines because Tara Strong is not in the room. And so that's the case. That actually happened, that occasionally happened on Rock Dog, where if someone wasn't available, somebody else just reads their lines. Not recorded, but for the sake of the other actor in the scene, right? Somebody else plays Bodhi.
Right, to avoid that thing we talked about where, like, you're reacting to nothing.
Exactly. So if you can find that video, I don't know where it is. It's that My Little Pony video or any other videos, you can kind of tell. You can kind of tell when it's real. And watch the body language and watch what the actor is doing. A common thing that they'll do if they have to physically act things out, you'll see they'll use their arms kind of on either side of the microphone. They'll do this I can't properly explain it through audio. It's not going to make sense over audio, but
they like move as they articulate because
yes,
it changes the way you talk.
But you're not moving. You're not significantly moving away from the microphone, right? Like you can't be like acting and like going off mic all the time. That's bizarre. It's not going to sound because the character's not doing that. But you can act forward. You can act towards the microphone. Right? You can physically, you can like, it's so tricky with voice too, because you can't like, you can't stomp. Like it's really hard when your character has to be running. Do you know what I mean? Like you have to just get good at like you have to just do it. And there's all that stuff. I would also say, by the way, there's 2 podcasts to listen to. There's 2 really good podcasts. One, anyone who's passionate about voice acting probably knows about this one. It's Voice Acting Mastery by Crispin Freeman. That one's really good. It's especially the early episodes. Those are good. It's very like because it's just Crispin talking to himself most of the time, but he has a lot of good information. I recommend that to anyone. There's an even better podcast with respect to Crispin. The podcast that I prefer is Defunct. And especially if you wanted to work in Vancouver, I don't know who you are if you do, but if you do, there's a podcast called Voice Print that was hosted by a guy called Trevor Duvall, who is a pretty famous Vancouver voice actor. For the last several years, he's been the non-Bradley Cooper voice of Rocket Raccoon. Like anytime it's not Bradley Cooper, it's him.
For in like the video games and cartoon.
Yeah. I don't know if he's in that new one that was just announced. I couldn't tell if it was him or not, but he's been Rocket most of the time. He's been in My Little Pony. He played one of those sort of stuck-up unicorns. I forget which one. That was him. He's in a bunch of... He's one of the Vancouver, the big guys. And he did this podcast called Voice Print. And it went on for a few years. I don't remember when it ended, but basically he interviewed all of the big voice actors in Vancouver at the time. And he also interviewed, if I'm not mistaken, I think he interviewed Carl Willems, who was the voice director for Rock Dog 2, just as an example. Like he interviewed, it's mostly actors, occasionally people above the line like Carl. And if you want to work in Vancouver, that podcast, there's nothing I would recommend more than listening to that entire podcast. And there's some notable voice actors that he never talked to. For example, Ashley Ball. Because during the height of when he was making that podcast, it was kind of when Ashley was, I guess, kind of in the position that I'm in now. Like, was sort of coming up. I don't think Andrew Francis is interviewed either. But he interviews Kathy Wesluck. He interviews Tabitha. He interviews Ian Corlett. He interviews Gary Chalk, the voice of Optimus Primal on Beast Wars. You know, he interviews, like, the heavy-hitting voice actors that are still around, but were particularly huge in, like, the early 2000s. They're still huge, but you know what I mean? But those 2 podcasts are brilliant because Trevor's podcast is just conversations. They're just talking, but if you're like me, and you're an obsessive weirdo, you can hear so many little details about going to different studios. They mention all the studios. They mention all the people. They mention their own prep. Do you know what I mean? There's a lot to dig into. Crispin's is not conversational. Crispin's podcast is more like I don't mean this in a bad way. It's almost like a audiobook or something. Like it's very prescriptive, I suppose. It's advice, and it's mostly career advice, if I'm not mistaken.
For the audience, Crispin Freeman is the guy who plays Togasa on Ghost in the Shell, and Kathy Weasley plays the Tachikomas. I found that on the IMDb page just now while I was looking them up.
I don't think the credits even mention it. You know that Kathy played the young Linux in Rock Dog 2?
No.
That kid? The kid that sings terribly? That's Kathy.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. What? How old is Linux if he was in a sailor suit? and also, everyone in this universe needs to chill out about booing. Right? Like, they boo the opening act. To this, you're not the people we pay to see. Well, yeah, it's his opening act.
You know what? That happened. I remember, Spinal Tap?
Yeah.
Like, I love Spinal Tap. And so those guys, the 3 Spinal Tap guys, I'm sorry that I don't remember their name.
That's okay.
Because they're in another band, I think called The Folksmen, in A Mighty Wind, if you've seen that movie, which is a brilliant movie. Mm-hmm. It's another mockumentary, right? And in that movie, it's all about folk music, but there's this band, I think they're called The Folksmen, it's as a joke, as a kind of in reference or in joke for the audience. It's the 3 guys from Spinal Tap that are playing this funny folk band, right? And so when Spinal Tap went on tour, the opening act was the Folksmen. And it's the same people, but the audience went insane. The audience booed like crazy. Like, they were so mad at the Folksmen. And when I hear about that, I'm like, I'm so glad I wasn't at that concert, because I would have been losing my mind about, like, you idiots. Like, it's them. It is Spinal Tap. It's just, they're going to come on later. It's like, it's this, don't you know? But of course they don't know. And so it wouldn't surprise me if people booing the opening act. One of the highlights when I was a teenager, the highlights of my life, I told you I was a huge fan of Fall Out Boy. I pilgrimaged to Hershey, Pennsylvania to see, I think it was actually my early 20s. I was either 19 or early 20s, to see the Blink-182 reunion, because in Hershey, Pennsylvania, it was Blink-182 and the opening acts were Panic at the Disco and Fall Out Boy. And so that was like, for me at that age, it was like, I have to go to Hershey, Pennsylvania. I have to go to this show. And at that time, fortunately, people weren't that stupid. But I totally wouldn't have been surprised if people booed Panic at the Disco or something. We're like, we want Blink. And it's like, shut up. It was like, what are you doing? Like, so these people that are here to see Lil Foxy, and they're booing True Blue.
Right. We don't care about your actual magic. Bring out the dancing bunnies.
Bring out the dancing bunnies that are in perfect synchronization, by the way. That's really impressive.
Yeah, that's the nature of animation. I'm sorry. Like, when I watch, if you ever want to have your favorite studio's like illusions dispelled for you, watch those shows with an animator or even a voice actor, because like the animator will be like, oh, they're doing this to save time. Like, there's like they lost control of an arm movement here in 3D, and it just twitched at the last minute in the final frame of the scene, and no one caught it. Yeah. And like that just happens. Okay, well, and then the last thing I had was, is there anything that you've worked on that you want to point listeners to?
Well, I've mentioned Dragalia, I've mentioned stuff like that. The thing, if I may be so bold, the thing that I would say after Rock Dog 2, the thing that I'm most proud of is I made a little game. It's just a little iPhone game called Echo Master, and I'm very, very proud of that game. And it's nothing big. Like, don't get me wrong, it's not but I'm like, one thing we didn't even talk about. Anyone who knows me in person, if I meet someone, from the second we meet, the timer has started until I eventually mention Undertale.
Oh God!
Just with how obsessed I am with Undertale.
Okay.
And so
you're in the right place.
Yeah,
don't worry.
Yeah. Undertale is the most profound experience of my life. Playing that game for the first time, I'm currently in the process of trying to get my hands on an Xbox Series X, just because I want to play. Because I've played every version of Undertale, and I haven't played the Xbox version. And there's a new room with Sans, where Sans has. Sans is not my favorite character, by the way. Not that I hate Sans, but because people, whenever I mention Undertale, people are like, "Oh yeah, the skeleton," and I'm like, "Yeah," and they're like, "Do you love that skeleton guy?" And it's like, "No, I don't know what." Like, he's fine. I like him a lot. I'm obsessed with a different character. I'm obsessed with Asriel, but
yeah, because he's sweet.
Because he's sweet, and he reminds me of me as a child, and it's very sad. But like every night I pray for more news on Deltarune, and anyway, Echo Master. If you see Echo Master, I can't stress the the extent to which Echo Master cannot compare to Undertale. Obviously, it's nothing. It's very simple. It really has more in common with Flappy Bird than anything else. But when people see Echo Master and they see the art, a lot of people are like, "Oh, you like Undertale, huh?" It's like oh, it's a game I'm very proud of. You play as you control a little bat. Imagine a game. It's similar to Flappy Bird, kind of. It's actually more similar to a game called River Raid for the old Atari 2600. River Raid, I think it was an arcade game too. Basically, imagine you're a bat going through just a very simple little pixelated tunnel, but everything is black. You have to use your sonar. So when you send out like a little sonar squeak, it illuminates the room, and that's how you are able to see the obstacles to avoid. I'm really proud of it. If you're interested in Echo Master, you can go to the website is thebatgame.com.
We'll put a link in the description too.
I appreciate it. And again, I'm not telling you to buy it, but if you just looked at it and were aware of it, I would appreciate it. I'm very proud of that game. It's the first game I ever made. That's not true. I made a Game Jam game, but it's the first game I released. And of the things I'm proud of, Rock Dog 2 is high up there, and then Echo Master has to be Echo Master. So I never played Undertale until when did I play Undertale for the first time? Not long ago. I think a year and a half ago. I played Undertale for the first time.
Wow.
And I'd never played it before. Honestly, because the fan base, similar to, I didn't mention this, but it's true. If I hadn't gotten into My Little Pony when I did, way before Friendship is Magic, respectfully to all you bronies, I think that the existence of bronies would have been a bit of a hurdle for me to get over, to check out the show. Do you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, because it would be like, it's a whole big thing, and I'd have to catch up on it, and people are going to know way more than I do, and
but
there's
also
like
the fan base. And again, I'm not trying to be disparaging because we actually had a whole conversation off the record about like the importance of accepting people and like I'm very progressive. I have no problem, and like when we're talking to the furry community, like I love you guys, but just if we're being honest, like if you've the brony community is responsible for like some Google image searches that are very off-putting. You know what I mean? And so I think I'm very grateful that I got into, because if I wasn't already a proto-brony, I don't know that I would have given the show a shot, and I would have really been missing out. That was the case for Undertale with me. That's another fan base that I love, and I love my fellow Undertale fans. And I will say, as the biggest Undertale fan that I know, who played the game so recently and is still so obsessed with it, I get it. I understand. Like, there's a lot to obsess over, and but prior to having played the game, just seeing some of the behavior, like that person that was given a cookie full of needles and stuff, like these things that happened, it was like, oh god, I don't want to play that game. But on the urging of actually that same in our off-topic conversation, I mentioned an ex-girlfriend of mine that I'm still very close with. It was her. She was like, you need to play Undertale. Like, you need to play this. And so at her urging, like I pay attention when she says something that strongly to me. So I played Undertale, my first playthrough in one day. Following day, I did the second playthrough, which, if you played Undertale, neutral pacifist.
You know exactly why.
Yeah, you know why.
If you played Undertale at all.
And
you know why you have to play it twice.
so that game, as an aside, when I talk about like this whole thing, by this point, I think by that point I might have already recorded Rock Dog. I don't remember, but it would have been around the same time. It would have been like moments before or after. But I played that game. I'd been trying to make my own video games for a long time. That when I had that show, all this stuff, I've always loved video games. I love video games and cartoons kind of equally, frankly. And I'd been slaving away trying to code my own game, which is a game that I still hope to make someday. It's very similar to Star Fox. But that game, I'd been working at it for like 9 to 10 years. And it was so bad. I sucked so much. It just sucked. Do you know what I mean? Like, it was just terrible. I was a terrible programmer. And it was awful. And it was just, I was trying, and it was so disheartening. And I'm sure other people that have done creative endeavors, like when you're making, and it just sucks so much. Anyway, all I'd gotten after like 10 years was this little 2D demo thing. And it sucked. And it was awful. And it was so demoralizing that after all this work, I'd gotten nowhere with it. After playing Undertale, I knew that Undertale was made with Game Maker. I'd known that before I ever played the game, just because I'm obsessed with games, and I know, like you, like a lot of us, I know things like that, if a game is Game Maker or Unity or Unreal. So I knew that, but I'd never used Game Maker, because I was like, that's for babies. I'm not going to do that. I want to make real video games. I don't want to use Game Maker. That's stupid. Pretty much the moment, I think within hours, if not minutes, of finishing Undertale the second time, I bought and installed Game Maker. And then, like, the next day, I tried to recreate this demo that I'd been working on for so many years that was so terrible. I was like, you know what, just for fun, I'm going to try to recreate that little demo in Game Maker, and it took 2 hours. 10 years of work. It took me 2 hours in Game Maker. And so I was like, okay, well, screw everything else. I'm going to use Game Maker from now on. And then I went on to make Echo Master. And literally, like, I released Echo Master earlier this year, and it pretty much took a year. Anyway, sorry to ramble so much.
Well, and it took you that 10 years of work to learn a lot of things, too.
That was mostly a waste of time. I should have, if I'd been smart, I would have played Undertale when it first came out and installed Game Maker then. I don't know. I've gotten into a lot of these debates. So again, like before I was a voice actor, I was a game journalist. And so I would get into all of these debates with people, right? Because like my show existed during when Feminist Frequency started to really blow up. And I needed to start using them. And so I found myself in a lot of situations with the unfortunate position, and I'm sure other listeners have been in this position. Maybe I've angered some listeners already, with that I was the only person in the room full of gamers that was on Anita's side, and was
yeah. Do you
know what I mean? Like there's different ways of saying I don't care, because there's the fold your arms and be like, well, I don't care. There's that way of doing it, and then there's just I don't care. It doesn't affect me. It's fine. There's people who love, like we just talked about Undertale a whole bunch, right? Like, I love Undertale. I could do another 4-hour interview all about just me ranting about Undertale, and how much I love it. And that's fine, and I've irritated many of the people in my life with that, talking about Undertale. There's games like, well, this is a bad example because of recent news, but like Five Nights at Freddy's, which I think is a masterpiece. I think that game is amazing. It's an incredible accomplishment. And Scott Cawthon has gone through his whole thing recently, and that's not really relevant to what I mean, but like there's no shortage of people that are as big a fan of Five Nights as I am of Undertale. And it's not that I don't like Five Nights at Freddy's. I actually, from afar, I really admire. I think, like I said, I think it's a masterpiece, but I haven't really gotten into it. And so the real question is, if I see people enjoying Five Nights at Freddy's, do I? And again, I don't hate Five Nights at Freddy's. I really like it, but I'm not part of that fandom. Do I feel the need to tell them that I don't like it? Do I feel the need to walk over to those people at the party that are in their Chica costumes or whatever? Do I need them to know that
Right. Does it benefit anybody?
And the answer is no. And I don't care that they know that I don't like it. I don't care that they like it. And again, it's a bad example because I can probably think of another game that I like, because Five Nights I do like. I admire it.
Yeah.
It's a really impressive achievement.
But yeah, like I get what you're saying. Like if there isn't anything to be gained by telling somebody that the thing they like you don't like, don't bother. Save everybody the emotional energy.
Unless and maybe this is the problem too. Maybe I'm just realizing something, because there's tons of situations. Like if we were hanging out one day, if you and I we're at a restaurant or something. Like when you're with your friends, it can be really fun to talk about that they like something that I don't like, or whatever. Or we can talk about I can think about times where I've talked to my friends about what was it? Is the first Jurassic Park movie better than the first Indiana Jones? Right? Something like that.
Yeah.
And that can be a fun debating. It can be fun to do that with your friends. But I don't want to do that with random people on the internet. I want to either have fun or not interact. Do you know what I mean? But maybe I think I've just had an epiphany. Maybe some of those folks that we see in the comments that feel the need to tell us that they hate Five Nights at Freddy's or Undertale, or you know what, even Rock Dog, maybe the answer is that they just don't have friends, and
to talk to about it.
Maybe they're reaching out to us to have that experience that we take for granted, of being with your friends and going oh, I love, I don't know, what? Oh, here's an example. I'm going to make a bunch of your listeners mad with this. Do you know what anime there's an anime that I don't care for. And it's called Sword Art Online.
Yep.
And it's no hatred to it. Certainly nothing against the actors.
Right.
And it's fine. And I, like everyone, the reason I don't like it is because I started watching it and then I kept watching it, which I think, you know what I mean? And I'm not throwing shade. I'm not talking about the performances. I'm not talking about anything, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, I've actually seen it front to back, and I liked it, and it's very aesthetically cool and stuff, and there are some fun moments in a lot of it, but it sort of has I like Inuyasha, but I have the same sort of Inuyasha feeling where I'm well, we're kind of retreading the same ground once in a while, and but again, I've had to tell myself, well, somebody is out, people are out there desperate for more of this. I shouldn't be mad that they're getting more of this.
Exactly.
Because I'm getting Rock Dog too.
And think about this. Think about the fact that we were just both talking about Sword Art Online, and again, it's similar to, I don't hate it. I just question, it might be the best idea for a story that anyone has ever had. Honestly. It is the most compelling concept for a show that I can think of. No, genuinely. And that's what got everyone to watch it. I just question why it's a harem anime. But
similarly, why is it a harem anime? Why is the adopted sister so into him? Is there a law in Japan that says we always have to have that
anime thing? Yeah, that's stuff like that, right? Now, mind you,
why does what's her name, the love interest? Because I actually the relationship a lot of the time between the main guy and the main gal.
That stuff's great, and the fact taken by itself, the fact that they get pseudo married and stuff is cute and cool for a show like that he actually but then that defeats the purpose of it being a harem. That you can't get married to one of them.
Why are we still structuring it like a harem anime if it's not a harem anime? And no, I like that. I like their relationship so much that I watched it with my wife, and we will still if we are doing something and we need to trade off, we'll say switch you, and we'll switch they do in Sword Art.
Oh, and I mean it's full. It's full of amazing things. That's when I'm criticizing it, I hope people know that it's under the auspice of oh my gosh, when I was enjoying that show, there wasn't a better show I'd ever seen. Like it was amazing. And a show like Attack on Titan that I am obsessed with, you know, there's plenty of criticisms people could have about that show. Or we were just talking about Dragon Ball Z. Like, I love Dragon Ball Z. Talk about a show that takes its time. Like, anyone that is like, oh, Dragon Ball Z, I could never get into that because it was just, I was so bored. There's nothing I can say to that. As a fan, I'm just like, yeah. It's like, yeah, I understand.
So, thanks a ton for joining us. This is actually really great because, like, I ask for every people ask me how, like, I get people on this show, and I'm like, you have to understand that for every, like, 5 or 10 emails I send out saying, hey, do you want to be on this, or hey, do you want to contribute to this, like, be featured on this episode, like, I get maybe one response, and often that response is, oh, sorry, I don't have time. So, like, this was awesome. I'm really excited because Rock Dog and the sequel are easily 2 of my favorite movies. Like, I liked Rock Dog 1 was my favorite movie of 2017.
Really?
And it was my favorite. And, like, because it was just fun. I needed fun because it was the beginning of the Trump era and everything was on fire and it was fun. And so it was, and so then now, and like this one, like, to me, really well, like, the Rock Dog 2 harkens back to that and picks up a lot of the same themes and, like, plot threads and things that I really liked. And so, like, I was watching with my friend Slate, and he was like, we were laughing about, like, how we had joked that, like, if we were going to have a Rock Dog cartoon show, what it would, you know, like a Rock Dog Saturday morning cartoon, we would need to have a thing where they get makeovers, and we'd need to have a thing, you know, like, just, and I'm like, oh my God, it's happening. It's happening. While we were watching it.
Yeah.
So no, I'm just overjoyed that I got to talk to you, because I've been
pleasure.
Like, trying to get some, I've been trying to run into somebody from Rock Dog for, like, let's see, it came out in 2017. So until now. And because, like, I talked to people. I talked to Adam Friedman. He was happy to talk to me over email, but he just is a busy guy. And so, but yeah, like, that's super amazing. And, like, I have to say, like, it's really great to hear that the people who are, like, making the media I care about also view it as important work.
Yes.
Like, you know, like, because, like I said, like, it's great when they're having fun, but it's also great to know that they think this is important.
Yes.
Like, it makes me think of, Jim Henson, your friend and mentor.
Yes.
No.
Oh yeah.
You and Jim go way back, but you as an honorary sort of Jim Henson character, voice actor.
Bodhi puppet.
But, like. Right, yeah,
you
we'll
could certainly make a
Bodhi
fursuit.
Right, yeah, no, we'll put we'll put a picture of Jinpa's
that was really impressive.
Bodhi-esque, his Rock Dog OC.
Incredible.
But the thing that Jim Henson said one time in an interview, I think it was, he said, like, I always make shows to solve one of humanity's problems. Like, I'm paraphrasing, but he was like, I made, Muppet Babies so that kids wouldn't be afraid to use their imagination. I made, we made the dinosaurs to address, like, global warming and, like,
especially with the ending,
discrimination and stuff like that. He's like, I always make it for these purposes, but it's always fun. And so that's what it makes me think. That's what it really made me think of when you started talking about, like, this is important work, because you remembered back when you were a kid watching shows, and you're like, this is the place that I can, like, retreat to, that's, like, stable, and it's, like, reasonable, and I like the, you are safe watching a cartoon. Like, the cartoon, whatever happens in it, like, that's just a world that you are in that nothing can befall you. And so, like, it's nice to have that space, even if it only exists, like, mentally, like, that you can psychologically recover in.
Absolutely.
And then like go out and face the world. And it's not just like a kid thing. Like when we watch shows as grown-ups, you know, like when I watch, I don't know, Star Trek The Next Generation for the upteenth time, or Lord of the Rings, like it's not like I don't remember what happened. It's just like, no, this is like a place I can go.
Absolutely.
And recover. And so like, yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Graham, for being on here. I look forward to all the cool things you're going to be adding to your IMDb page.
Thank you. Thank you.
Time. So, but yeah, come back anytime. And if the powers that be make a Rock Dog 3 happen.
Yeah, that'd be a dream.
Well, right, that'd be just a dream. We'll in that hypothetical future, we'll have you back on.
Of course, anytime. Yeah. I'd love to, man. I had a great time.
Remember to follow where your heart leads, because that is the only path to your dreams. This has been your host, Tempo. If you're curious about the books I write, you can find a link in the description to Fur Planet Productions, who also sponsored this episode. Until next time, take care.